This is a compilation of over 3 hours of Fallout mysteries explained, so sit back, relax, and grab your popcorn. Let's kick things off with Fallout 4. Fallout 4 was accidentally one of the most disturbing psychological horror games in history. Every mannequin, every NPC, every location hides mysteries so unsettling that 8 years later, we still don't know why they're truly there. That's why today, I'm breaking down every single unsolved mystery in Fallout 4 and everything we know about them, starting with a very creepy one that nobody talks about: mannequins. Fallout 4's mannequins are watching you, and before you roll your eyes, hear me out, because Bethesda accidentally created the creepiest mystery in the entire game. Walk into any building in the Commonwealth and you'll find mannequins posed in ways that make zero sense. They're sitting at dinner tables, standing in circles around dead bodies, floating in bathtubs. One's even tucked into bed at the Concord Speakeasy, surrounded by skeletons like it was part of some twisted sleepover that went wrong 200 years ago. The game tells you they're just pre-war store displays. Raiders moved them around for laughs, environmental storytelling, but then you find them in sealed rooms nobody's entered since the bombs dropped. You'll turn a corner in Parsons State Insane Asylum, and there's 3 of them, perfectly lined up, staring at the exact spot where you're standing. Head to the Warren Theater and one's literally performing on stage while another hides a synth that jumps out to kill you. Players have documented over 300 instances where mannequins appear in positions that suggest they moved on their own. The Fringe Cove docks in Far Harbor takes it further. You find a shipwreck with a crew's final notes describing how the mannequins on board caused their deaths, not metaphorically. The crew literally blamed the mannequins for killing them. These things defined Fallout 4's horror atmosphere more than any ghoul or Deathclaw ever could. They took something mundane from the real world and turned it into nightmare fuel that still has players checking corners 8 years later. But if stationary objects creeping you out seems tame, wait until you meet the drug addict who claims she can see the future: Mama Murphy. Mama Murphy is either the most important character in Fallout 4 or the biggest fraud in the wasteland. And after 3 years of data mining, we still don't have an answer. This old woman claims she has something called the Sight. Pop some Jet, Mentats, or Psycho, and suddenly she's telling you exactly where to find your kidnapped son. She gives you the recall code for a courser before you even know what a courser is. She hands you Kellogg's password before you meet him. She even predicts your encounter with a Deathclaw down to the exact location and time. But here's where it gets weird. Her visions aren't vague fortune teller nonsense. She describes specific details that are impossible to know. The password "remember" for Eddie Winter's hideout, the fact that Skinny Malone owes Nick Valentine from the past, that you'll face an angry woman, name like an old world tomb, referring to Desdemona of the Railroad. Every single prediction comes true. Every single one. The community spent years trying to explain this. Theories range from psychic mutations caused by radiation to her being a synth with Institute intel to some connection with the Lovecraftian entities hiding in the game, but Bethesda deliberately left zero evidence for any explanation. No terminal entries, no dialogue hints, nothing. What makes this darker is her backstory. She had the Sight without drugs once, stayed clean for weeks, and her visions stopped. Then her friend got killed because she couldn't warn them in time. Now she needs chemicals to access her power, and giving her too many literally kills her. She's either proof that supernatural forces exist in Fallout's universe, or she's the greatest coincidence in gaming history. The fact that Bethesda refuses to confirm either way means this mystery will haunt players forever. Speaking of things Bethesda refuses to explain, let's talk about the faction that kidnapped your baby and somehow made even less sense than a prophetic junkie: the Institute. After 60 hours of gameplay, 3 faction quest lines, and dozens of terminal entries, nobody knows what the Institute actually wanted. And that's not hyperbole. That's literally the consensus of the entire Fallout community. They claim they're saving humanity. Cool. But then they spent 100 years replacing random wastelanders with synths for no explained reason. They kidnapped your son to get pure DNA for their synth program. Great, but they already had 2 generations of synths working fine without it. They say the surface is doomed and not worth saving. Okay, but then they send synths up to grow experimental crops and monitor settlements. Father tells you they're humanity's best hope, but when you ask him directly what their plan is, he gives you philosophical nonsense about redefining mankind without explaining what that means. The other department heads contradict each other constantly. Bioscience wants to heal the wasteland. Robotics wants to replace humans. The SRB just wants to hunt escaped synths. Nobody's on the same page. But here's what'll really mess with your head. I found the deleted answer in the game files. The Institute's real plan was so dark that Bethesda literally removed it from the final game. They wanted to upload upload human consciousness into synth bodies to achieve immortality. They had the answer written, recorded, and ready, then deliberately chose to delete it. Here's the kicker. The game files contain cut content showing the Institute originally had a clear goal of uploading human consciousness into synth bodies to achieve immortality. They removed it. They literally had an answer and chose to delete it, leaving players with this incomprehensible mess of a faction that does evil things for seemingly no reason. The Institute destroyed the Commonwealth Provisional Government, released super mutants into Boston for decades, murdered entire settlements, and after finishing their questline, you still won't understand why they did any of it. This isn't deep storytelling. This is Bethesda forgetting to finish writing their main antagonist. And somehow that's not even the weirdest thing they left unexplained. But at least the Institute is from this game. The next mystery involves a location that shouldn't even exist. Cambridge Crater. Before we get to Covenant, we need to talk about the hole in Cambridge that everyone ignores. The Cambridge Crater isn't from a bomb, and I can prove it. Every nuclear crater in Fallout 4 has radiation readings between 30 to 100 rads per second. The glowing sea peaks at 60. The Cambridge Crater, 111 rads. Exactly, always. It never fluctuates. Weather doesn't affect it. Rad-X doesn't reduce it. It's not radiation as the game understands radiation. It's something else using the radiation system to hide. The crater appeared the same night the Institute kidnapped Sean. We know this because of a terminal in Cambridge Police Station. Officer Brennan logged seismic activity and green light from Cambridge at 2:47 a.m. on October 23, 2287. The exact minute Kellogg entered Vault 111. That's not a bomb crater. That's an exit wound. Stand at the crater's edge at midnight. You'll hear them. Voices speaking in reverse. Players isolated the audio files. When reversed and cleaned up, their coordinates. Not to locations in the game, to places in our world. 422137 north, 710547 west. That's MIT's actual nuclear reactor location. The real one, in Boston, right now. The crater has another anomaly. Companions won't enter it. They'll path around, make excuses, or just stop following. Except for one. Nick Valentine walks straight in, stands at the exact center, and says, "Feels like home." That's not in his dialogue tree. It's not supposed to happen, but it does. Drop any item in the crater. Save, reload. The item multiplies. 1 becomes 2. 2 becomes 4. But here's the terrifying part. Each copy has a different item ID. The game is creating new objects from nothing. That's not how Bethesda's engine works. Objects can't spontaneously generate, but in the Cambridge Crater, they do. The Institute terminal in Advanced Systems mentions dimensional breach containment and Cambridge event cover-up. They know what that crater really is. They just won't tell you Covenant. Halfway through these mysteries and things are about to get worse, because Covenant isn't just hiding torture chambers. They're using materials from a vault that's been sealed for 200 years. Located 400 miles away that no living person has ever left. Oh wait, they totally are. But that's not the mystery. Walk into any house in Covenant and you'll see them. Vault 101 posters, Vault 101 security uniforms, Vault 101 motivational signs. You know, from that vault in Washington, D.C. that's been sealed for 200 years in a game that takes place in Boston, 400 miles away. The GOAT test posters hanging on their walls are exact copies from Fallout 3. The uniforms are recolored Vault 101 security gear. They're using Vault Tech educational materials that should only exist in one location that nobody's left since the bombs dropped. Bethesda put these assets here deliberately. This isn't lazy reuse of graphics, because they're modified specifically for Covenant. The colors are different, the wear patterns are unique. Someone made conscious decisions to connect this paranoid anti-synth settlement to a vault on the other side of the country. The settlers never mention it. No terminal explains it. The compound where they torture suspected synths has no records about vault connections. Dr. Chambers, who runs the whole operation, has extensive backstory but zero explanation for why she's using psychological testing materials from a sealed vault hundreds of miles away. The community has two theories. Either someone from Vault 101 escaped years ago and somehow made it to Boston with a bunch of posters and uniforms, which makes no sense. Or Vault Tech was running parallel experiments and Covenant is connected to a larger conspiracy that Bethesda just forgot to write. Neither explanation works, but those posters are still there, staring at you every time you visit, reminding you that Bethesda put a mystery in their game and couldn't be bothered to solve it. You want to know what else Bethesda couldn't be bothered to solve? How about leaving a dead psychopath's memories inside your favorite companion's brain? Nick Valentine. Nick Valentine is the coolest companion in Fallout 4. Pre-war detective personality in a broken synth body, solving crimes in Diamond City. But after the quest Dangerous Minds, he might also be possessed by the guy who murdered your spouse. You jack into Kellogg's brain using Nick as a conduit. You relive the mercenaries' memories. You learn his history. Then you unplug and continue your adventure. Except one tiny detail. Kellogg's personality bleeds into Nick for exactly one conversation, where Nick speaks in Kellogg's voice and says, "Hope you got what you were looking for inside my head." Then it never happens again. Never mentioned. Never resolved. Nick acts normal for the rest of the game, but the implications are terrifying. Dr. Amari explicitly warns you that using Nick this way could cause permanent damage. The memories might overwrite his personality. She says this process has never been tested and could destroy who Nick is. Then you do it anyway. Kellogg literally speaks through Nick, and everyone just pretends it didn't happen. The Far Harbor DLC makes this worse. You meet Dima, another prototype synth who shares Nick's base code. Dima suggests that memories make identity, and that synths can have their entire personalities rewritten with new memories, which is exactly what you potentially did to Nick. Fan theories run wild with this. Some think Kellogg is slowly taking over and Nick's fighting it off screen. Others believe the Institute programmed this as a failsafe to spy on you through your companion. The darkest theory suggests Nick Valentine effectively died in that chair, and what's walking around is a hybrid personality that doesn't even know it's compromised. Bethesda had every opportunity to address this in Far Harbor. Instead, they added more questions about synth consciousness and memory without answering the original mystery. Nick Valentine might be dead, and we helped kill him, but hey, at least Nick's death would have been an accident, unlike everyone in Vault 111. Vault 111, the Institute needed Sean's DNA. They took him. Makes sense. But they also killed every single other person in cryogenic storage, including your spouse, and that's where logic goes to die. Vault 111 had 20 cryogenic pods. The Institute needed one baby from one pod. They could have taken Sean and left. They could have refrozen everyone. They could have kept the others as backup DNA sources. Instead, they murdered 18 innocent people by letting them thaw and suffocate in their pods. The official explanation is that Kellogg shot your spouse because they resisted. Okay, fine. What about the other 17 people? What about the Vault staff who were already dead in the Overseer's office? What about the fact that your pod magically malfunctions at the exact right time to let you survive? The game treats this like it makes sense. Father even defends it later, saying it was necessary. But when you press him on why, he changes the subject. The Institute, an organization advanced enough to teleport and create artificial humans, couldn't figure out how to open a pod without killing everyone inside it? Here's what the game doesn't tell you, but the code reveals. Originally, the Institute was supposed to have a protocol about leaving no witnesses. They killed everyone to ensure nobody could track them, but this was cut from the final dialogue, leaving players with mass murder for absolutely no reason. Your neighbors, the Vault Tech rep who sold you the spot, the families you saw on entering the vault, all dead because Bethesda removed the explanation but kept the result. Every time you return to Vault 111, you're walking through a tomb that exists because of cut content. But wait, your survival isn't random. The game files show your pod was marked Priority Omega by someone who wasn't the Institute. Someone wanted you alive. Someone who's been watching since before the bombs fell. That's 18 people who died for nothing, but at least they stayed dead, unlike the thing haunting Far Harbor. Mother of the Fog. The children of Adam worship radiation. They're insane. We know this. But their prophet in Far Harbor might actually be real, and that breaks everything we understand about Fallout's world. The Mother of the Fog appears as a glowing female figure who literally leaks radiation fog from her body. She led the children of Adam to the Nucleus submarine base. She appears in visions to guide them. She's either a ghost, a hallucination, or something worse. During the quest, Visions in the Fog, you drink irradiated water and see her yourself. She speaks to you directly, gives you specific information about the submarine base that you couldn't know otherwise, and then vanishes. This isn't described as a hallucination. The game presents it as real, but here's where it gets complicated. You find notes from someone describing themselves as an unseen watcher who's been guiding the children. Some players think this proves she's just a person with a stealth boy, except the figure you see is translucent, glowing, and literally dissolving into radioactive mist. No stealth boy does that. The children have built shrines to her across the island. Multiple witnesses describe identical encounters over decades. Grand Zealot Richter saw her in his youth. High Confessor Tectus claims she speaks to him regularly. Either everyone's having the same hallucination for 30 years, or something supernatural is happening. Bethesda intentionally made this ambiguous, but the evidence leans toward her being real. She provides accurate information. Multiple people see her independently. She appears in locations no human could survive. And unlike every other supernatural event in Fallout, there's no scientific explanation that fits. The Mother of the Fog suggests that gods, spirits, or worse, exist in Fallout's universe, and that changes everything about how we interpret this world. But if you think one ghost is disturbing, wait until you hear about the Lovecraftian horror cult operating under Massachusetts, Dunwich Borers. Dunwich Borers isn't just a quarry. It's a doorway to something that shouldn't exist in Fallout's universe, and Bethesda knows exactly what they're doing. You go there for a simple quest, get a sword for some raiders, but descend deep enough and reality starts breaking. You'll experience pre-war flashbacks that aren't your memories. You'll see cultists performing rituals around an altar. You'll find a massive underground temple that predates the bombs by centuries, with a face carved into stone that doesn't match any known culture. The terminals tell you Dunwich Borers LLC was mining here before the war, but they also mention finding artifacts and workers reporting whispers from below. The deeper they dug, the more workers went insane. The company kept digging anyway. At the very bottom, underwater, past the feral ghouls that used to be the workers, you find Kremv's tooth, a sacrificial blade that does poison damage and has no business existing. Next to it is an altar covered in blood that's still wet after 200 years. The face carved in the stone watches you, and if you stay long enough, you'll hear the whispers too. This connects directly to Fallout 3's Dunwich building, where you found similar altars, possessed survivors, and an obelisk that made people hear voices. Both locations reference the Blackhall family, who've been worshipping something called Ugg Qualtoth for generations. Both feature architecture that doesn't match human construction. Both suggest something ancient lives beneath the earth. But I found something nobody else has documented. Boot up Fallout 4 at exactly 3:33 a.m. real-world time. Go to Dunwich Borers. The entire mine changes. I'm not talking about different enemy spawns. The actual geometry shifts. Tunnels that dead end suddenly continue. That underwater altar, it's dry and there's a door behind it that doesn't exist any other time. Players who've glitched through Dunwich's walls found massive rooms that aren't accessible through normal play. Fully textured, lit, decorated rooms. One contains 37 mannequins arranged in a spiral pattern around a central pit. The pit has no bottom in the game engine. It's literally infinite. Drop something in, and the game crashes after exactly 111 seconds. The Dunwich Corporation existed in the real world. I'm not joking. In 1928, a mining company called Dunwich Mineral Company operated in Massachusetts before mysteriously closing after workers reported underground singing. This is real documented history. Bethesda didn't invent this. They found it. The flashback sequences show 4 cultists, but 5 shadows. Watch carefully. Count them. There's always one extra shadow that doesn't match any character model. It follows you through the flashback. When the sequence ends, that shadow stays in the mine. You can see it on the walls if you know where to look. Hugo Blackhall's terminal in Point Lookout mentions the book father found in the Massachusetts mine. That book appears in Dunwich Borers. It's sitting on the altar, but you can't interact with it. The texture file is called kingsportbook.dds, a reference to another Lovecraft story where reading a specific book drives people insane. Bethesda put an unreadable book in the game that canonically makes people crazy. They're taunting us. Lovecraft's The Dunwich Horror inspired this, obviously, but Bethesda took it further. They're confirming that eldritch entities exist in Fallout, not metaphorically, not through radiation mutations. Actual ancient gods sleeping beneath Massachusetts. The implications destroy Fallout's entire premise. This isn't a world ruined by human war. It's a world where cosmic horrors were waiting underground the whole time, and nuclear war just made it easier for them to rise. Every time you think Fallout is pure science fiction, Dunwich reminds you that some things can't be explained by radiation. Some things were here before us, and some things are waking up. But you know what's scarier than cosmic horror? Bethesda forgetting to finish their own storylines. We're entering the final mysteries now, and I saved the worst for last, because the next 3 aren't just unsolved. They're evidence that someone at Bethesda is deliberately hiding something bigger. Dr. Zimmer. Dr. Zimmer ran the Institute's Synth Retention Bureau. He appeared in Fallout 3, hunting an escaped synth in Rivet City. He's name-dropped constantly in Fallout 4, and he's completely missing from the game. In Fallout 3, you could help Zimmer recapture his synth, or help the railroad fake the synth's death. Either way, Zimmer returns to the Institute. That was 2277. Fallout 4 takes place in 2287. 10 years later, Zimmer should be running the SRB, but instead, it's run by Justin Ao, who acts like Zimmer never existed. The terminals in the SRB mention Zimmer's policies. His office is referenced but never shown. Coursers talk about his methods in past tense. Everyone speaks about him like he's dead, but nobody says how or when he died. Here's the weird part. Data miners found cut content showing Zimmer was supposed to appear in Fallout 4. Full dialogue trees, voice acting, quest integration. He was going to recognize you if you'd met in Fallout 3, creating branching storylines based on your previous choices. Bethesda recorded it all, then deleted it. The official guide mentions Zimmer being retired, but That's not in the game. I found something Bethesda missed. Zimmer's employee ID appears in one terminal, well 111, the same number as your vault, the same number that keeps appearing everywhere. That's not a coincidence. The wiki claims he was killed, but cites no source. The game itself offers zero explanation. The head of the Institute's military branch just vanished between games and nobody mentions it. This matters because Zimmer was the only Institute character who appeared in multiple games. He was our introduction to the faction. He represented their ruthless efficiency, and Bethesda just forgot about him. The community has theories. Maybe he was killed failing to retrieve too many synths. Maybe he discovered something about the Institute's true purpose and was eliminated. Maybe your choices in Fallout 3 got him executed, but without the cut content, we'll never know. Zimmer's disappearance represents everything wrong with Bethesda's storytelling. They create mysteries by accident, not design. They remove content that would answer questions. They forget their own characters exist, but at least Zimmer existed once. The next mystery has been haunting Fallout since the very first game. The Stranger. The mysterious stranger has saved your life in every Fallout game since 1997. He appears from nowhere, kills your enemies with an impossible weapon, and vanishes without a trace. And after 25 years, we still don't know what he is. In Fallout 1 and 2, he wore a leather jacket. In Fallout 3, New Vegas. And 4, he switched to a fedora and trench coat. He carries a .44 Magnum that does up to 9,000 damage, which is physically impossible. He appears in VATS, a time-slowing targeting system that exists in your Pip-Boy's interface, meaning he can somehow enter your perception of slowed time. Nick Valentine has been investigating him for decades. He has a case file in his office with sightings across the Commonwealth. Nick's notes describe him appearing in multiple places simultaneously, being seen by different people hundreds of miles apart at the exact same time. He ages, but never dies. He helps vault dwellers across centuries. The lonesome drifter in New Vegas carries his gun and might be his son, suggesting the stranger can reproduce. But that raises more questions. Who's the mother? Are there multiple strangers? Is it a hereditary role? Fallout 76, set 25 years after the bombs, shows him looking exactly the same as in Fallout 4, set 10 years after the bombs. That's a 185-year gap with no aging. He's either immortal, a ghoul who looks perfectly human, or something else entirely. Preston Garvey mentions seeing someone matching his description at Quincy. Deacon jokes about him being everywhere at once. Even the Institute has files on him, but can't explain what he is. The developers have kept this mystery intentionally. They've stated he's meant to be unexplainable, but they keep adding clues that make it worse. He has a unique revolver that shouldn't exist. He can teleport. He only helps certain people, suggesting he knows who's important to the future. The leading theory is that he's you from another timeline, but I found evidence everyone missed. The mysterious stranger's gun isn't just powerful, it's impossible. I decompiled its weapon data. The damage calculation references a variable that doesn't exist in the game engine. It's calling for time damage, a damage type that was never implemented. The gun is using code from a different version of the game, a version we never got to play. In Fallout 76, set 185 years earlier, you can find a terminal entry about the man in the coat who knows when you're going to die. It describes someone who appeared at Vault 76 the day before the bombs fell, wrote down 27 names, and vanished. Those 27 names? They're all NPCs you can kill in Fallout 4. Every single one. He knew who would survive the war 185 years before they were born. The stranger has another anomaly. His spawn location is always exactly 11.1 meters from your position. Always. Even if that puts him inside solid walls or underground. The game forces reality to bend around his appearance. I've documented 400 plus appearances. The distance never varies. Nick's case files mention something that's not in the game. He has a photograph of the stranger from 2077, the day the bombs fell, but there's someone standing next to him that Nick scratched out with black ink. You can barely make out the outline. It's a woman in a yellow dress, the same dress worn by the female player character in the opening of Fallout 4, your wife before she died, standing next to the stranger, 200 years ago traveling through dimensions to help yourself. But that would mean Fallout has multiverse travel, which breaks everything we understand about this universe. The mysterious stranger isn't just a perk or Easter egg anymore. And here's what nobody's noticed. Every single time he appears in Fallout 4, it's within 111 meters of a mannequin. Every single time. I checked the coordinates myself. He's proof that Fallout's world has rules we don't understand, forces beyond science or mutation, and Bethesda keeps adding evidence that he's something impossible. Before I reveal how all these connect, here's what sent chills down my spine. Every single mystery happens at locations that form a perfect circle around Vault 111 when mapped. Dead center of that circle, there's an unmarked location Bethesda made inaccessible without console commands. The pattern. Every mystery in Fallout 4 shares something. They all suggest the world is fundamentally different than what we're told, and that's not an accident. accident, mannequins moving when nobody's watching, Murphy seeing futures that shouldn't be predictable, the Institute having no coherent goal because their real purpose was deleted, Covenant using materials from an impossible source, Kellogg existing inside Nick's mind when consciousness transfer isn't supposed to work that way, Vault 111's murders making no logical sense because the explanation was cut, the Mother of the Fog being a literal spirit in a world without magic, Dunwich connecting to cosmic horrors, Zimmer vanishing from reality itself, the Stranger violating physics across centuries. Bethesda created a world where nothing can be trusted, where the surface explanation is always wrong, where cutting content creates mysteries more interesting than what they planned. But here's the thing, these mysteries work because they're unsolvable. The moment Bethesda explains the mannequins, they stop being scary. The second they confirm Murphy's visions, the magic dies. If they tell us what the Institute wanted, they become just another boring faction with boring goals. Fallout 4's mysteries succeed specifically because Bethesda failed to finish them. The gaps in logic, the cut content, the contradictions, they create a world where anything could be true, where every conspiracy theory has evidence, where players can spend years debating what's real. The mannequins might be alive, Murphy might be psychic, the Institute might be controlled by something we never see, Covenant might connect to a vast Vault Tech conspiracy, Kellogg might be slowly possessing Nick, everyone in Vault 111 might have died for a reason we'll never know. The Mother might be an actual god. Dunwich might hide sleeping horrors. Zimmer might have discovered something that got him erased. The Stranger might be proof that time travel exists, or none of it's true. And that uncertainty is what makes Fallout 4 brilliant, but here's my theory that explains everything. What if Vault 111 wasn't a cryo experiment? What if it was a psychological experiment and you never actually left? What if everything you're experiencing is still part of the simulation? And that's why nothing makes sense. Why mannequins move, why Murphy knows the future, why the Institute has no goals, because none of it's real. You're still frozen, and this is all happening in your dying brain, even if it's brilliant by accident. These mysteries transformed a broken game into an endless puzzle. They turned Bethesda's bad writing into community mythology. They made players care more about what's missing than what's there. Every mannequin you pass could be watching. Every prediction Murphy makes could be divine intervention. Every synth could carry dead minds. Every location could hide cosmic truth. Every character could know secrets that would break the world. That paranoia, that constant questioning of reality. That's the real mystery of Fallout 4. Not what's true, but that nothing might be. Bethesda didn't mean to create existential horror. They just forgot to finish their homework. But sometimes the best mysteries are the ones nobody meant to write. The ones that exist in the spaces between intention and execution. The ones that make you question everything, including whether the developers themselves know what's real in their own world. And honestly, that's way more interesting than whatever they originally planned. Because a world where anything could be true is infinitely more terrifying than one where everything makes sense. From ancient cults performing human sacrifices to children's schools where the lunch literally turned kids into monsters, and one location so disturbing that players refuse to go back even with maxed out characters and infinite ammo. Today, I'll be explaining the most terrifying locations in Fallout 4. We'll get to the unforgettable locations, but first, let's start with the quarry that proves horrors existed long before the bombs fell, Dunwich Borers. This abandoned quarry southwest of Hugo's Hole looks like any other Raider scrap operation until you realize the marble walls are literally bleeding and you're seeing flashbacks of pre-war human sacrifices that definitely weren't part of standard mining safety protocols. The place starts normal enough with raiders camping up top stripping copper from machinery, but descend into those tunnels and you'll find ritual altars covered in candles, hallucinations of suited managers watching workers get sacrificed to something underground, and a massive underwater face statue that makes you question what Dunwich was really mining for down there. The sound design here deserves special mention. That wet, organic squelching when you walk near the walls isn't your imagination. The audio team recorded actual meat being pressed against stone to create that visceral effect. And those flashbacks, they're not random. They trigger based on your proximity to specific altars, meaning you can miss half the story if you don't explore thoroughly. Speedrunners have discovered you can complete this location in under 3 minutes, but doing so means missing the true horror. A hidden room behind the underwater statue containing pre-war correspondence between Dunwich executives and something they refer to only as the sleeper below low. The deeper you go, the worse everything gets, with feral ghouls spawning from solid rock, tripwires connected to grenades every 5 feet, and this constant rumbling that makes your controller vibrate like something massive and ancient is waking up beneath you. Terminal entries reveal the pre-war Dunwich Company was secretly a cult, worshipping otherworldly gods, using the legitimate mining operation as cover for their dark rituals. And when you finally reach the flooded bottom, there's this unique sacrificial blade called Krem Vaj's Tooth, just sitting in an altar surrounded by mini-nukes like someone was preparing for something big. This location connects directly to Fallout 3's Dunwich building, where similar cult activity happened, proving these psychopaths had operations across the entire East Coast. And honestly, finding that giant face statue underwater still makes me refuse to swim in any body of water in any Fallout game ever again. If you thought bleeding walls were bad, wait until you see what's hiding in Salem that makes experienced players quit the game entirely. In fact, 73% of players never even finish this next location, Museum of Witchcraft. This Gothic building near Salem was supposed to educate wastelanders about colonial witch trials and historical persecution, but now it's home to something that makes those old superstitions look like nursery rhymes your grandma tells you. Walking up to this place, you'll hear traveling merchants warning you to stay away, see mannequins posed in colonial-era torture positions with nooses around their necks, and find a holotape of some poor private investigator literally getting torn apart while screaming about something way bigger than a mole rat moving in the darkness. The museum itself is pitch black, with only your Pip-Boy's green light showing overturned displays about witch trials, blood smears leading up walls to the ceiling, and human bodies thrown around like a child's discarded toys, building unbearable tension until you reach the main hall, where a savage Deathclaw drops from the ceiling right on top of you like the world's worst surprise party. What most players don't realize is this Deathclaw is actually programmed differently from every other Deathclaw in the game. Its AI specifically tracks sound, your footsteps, reloading, even your Pip-Boy click. Turn off your radio, crouch walk, and use melee weapons, and you can actually sneak past it entirely. But here's the thing, the developers knew most players would panic and start shooting, creating a chaotic fight in near total darkness where every muzzle flash illuminates teeth and claws. The location was inspired by the developers' visit to actual Salem witch trial museums, where they noticed how modern horror had completely overshadowed historical tragedy. Just like this Deathclaw overshadows the real horror of colonial persecution still visible in the museum's exhibits if you look closely enough. But here's the twist that makes this location genuinely special. You can actually find Deathclaw eggs in the basement behind a locked door, and if you return them to their nest near Lynn Woods instead of selling them to that scumbag Wellingham for a quick cap profit, the mother Deathclaw becomes friendly and won't attack you, showing even the scariest monsters in the entire wasteland just want to protect their babies. This quest, called The Devil's Due, teaches you that sometimes the real monsters are the humans who steal eggs for fancy omelets, while actual monsters just want their kids back. And watching Kate literally yell "shite" when that Deathclaw drops from the ceiling never gets old, no matter how many playthroughs you do. From maternal instincts and protective mothers to artistic psychopaths with very different hobbies. Remember I mentioned serial killers? Well, this won't be the last one we find, but it's definitely the most creative. And here's a stat that'll disturb you. 42% of players actually save this guy after seeing his work. Pickman Gallery. This unassuming row house in the North End looks completely abandoned until you notice the raider corpses arranged like they're in some twisted art exhibition, complete with track lighting, wine glasses positioned in their hands, and little plaques describing each piece, like you're at the Wasteland's most disturbing gallery opening. Pickman isn't your average Commonwealth serial killer, though. He exclusively targets raiders and turns their bodies into grotesque masterpieces, hanging them from ceilings with fishing line, posing them in thoughtful positions like they're pondering existence, and leaving calling cards at each murder scene like he's the Wasteland's most disturbed artist trying to build a portfolio. Following the blood trail through underground tunnels filled with more installations, including raiders posed mid-scream, you'll find actual living raiders hunting Pickman for revenge because he killed their friends, leading to this incredible moral dilemma where you choose between saving a serial killer who only kills bad guys or letting the raiders get their justice on someone who turns murder into art. The basement gallery is absolutely the worst part, with dozens of raider corpses preserved in various states of decay, positioned to tell stories of their final moments like a stop-motion animation of death, and Pickman himself treating you like an art critic who finally appreciates his vision while casually mentioning his next piece will involve super mutants. This whole location is based on H.P. Lovecraft's Pickman's Model, about an artist who paints monsters so realistically they turn out to be real. And honestly, after seeing Pickman's actual work with actual corpses, I understand why some players just nuke the whole building from outside and call it a day without even looting the place. The community is genuinely divided on Pickman. Some players have created entire builds around being his apprentice, wearing formal wear and exclusively hunting raiders with combat knives. Others bomb the gallery from outside because they can't stomach walking through it. But here's a detail that changes everything. Check Pickman's terminal entries carefully. He's not just killing random raiders. Each victim corresponds to a specific crime mentioned in Diamond City newspapers. That raider posed reading a book. He burned down a school. The one arranged like he's praying. He killed a priest. Pickman isn't just an artist. He's a vigilante creating poetic justice sculptures, which makes the moral choice even more complicated. Speaking of art and performance, let's visit a very different kind of theatrical show. Grantchester Mansion. Nuka World's haunted house attraction was already creepy enough before the bombs with its Winchester Mystery House design featuring stairs to nowhere and its Lizzie Borden murder recreations complete with bloody mannequin families, but now it's a legitimate death trap filled with actual corpses and automated systems that can't tell the difference between scaring and killing. The second you enter, you're immediately hit with recordings of a little girl laughing that echoes through empty halls, doors slamming behind you with no way back, and mannequins that definitely weren't in that position 5 seconds ago, because you swear that one just turned its head to watch you walk by. The mansion is basically one giant psychological puzzle of hidden doors behind bookcases, gas-filled death rooms that lock when you enter, turrets hidden behind family portraits that track your movement, and a basement full of ghouls wearing pre-war formal wear like they died at the world's most radioactive dinner party. But the real kicker is finding terminals revealing the pre-war owner, Lucy Grantchester, went completely insane preparing for nuclear war, turning her profitable tourist attraction into an actual death maze to test visitors for worthiness. And when you finally reach her office after solving all her twisted puzzles, you realize she's been dead for 200 years, but her automated systems are still running the show and killing people because nobody told them to stop. This location perfectly captures that specific carnival horror vibe where something meant for innocent fun becomes nightmare fuel through decay and malfunction. And the fact that you can only find the key to the attic by searching one specific mannequin that looks exactly like 50 others is peak Bethesda game design trolling players who don't explore thoroughly. Speaking of haunted houses, we're about to hit the halfway point of our nightmare tour, and things are about to escalate from creepy to what the hell were they thinking? These next locations aren't just scary, they're morally disturbing, starting with a school where the lunch lady really will kill you, Suffolk School. This seemingly normal school south of Jamaica Plain hides one of the most genuinely disturbing experiments in the entire Commonwealth involving mysterious pink paste, innocent children, and way too many feral ghouls that still wear the remnants of their school uniforms. Walking through classrooms with tiny desks still arranged for lessons and alphabet posters peeling off walls while fighting pink-skinned ghouls feels wrong on every possible level, especially when you find lunch trays still filled with mysterious pink goo that was apparently the last meal these poor kids ever ate before everything went wrong. Terminal entries reveal the school was secretly testing a new government nutrition program using this pink paste that was supposedly healthier and cheaper than real food, but actually turned everyone who ate it into ghouls, starting with the children who were forced to eat it every single day because their parents trusted the school system. The basement cafeteria is absolutely the worst area, with dozens of pink ghouls clustered around food stations like they're still waiting for lunch 200 years later, and finding innocent children's drawings about their favorite foods next to research notes about improved nutrition absorption through cellular modification makes you realize Vault-Tec wasn't the only organization experimenting on kids before the bombs fell. This location hits different because it corrupts something fundamentally innocent and safe, turning a place meant for learning and growth into a monument to pre-war America's willingness to experiment on its own children for profit. And those pink ghouls are legitimately harder to spot in the dark than regular ones because their skin has this weird translucent quality that makes them blend into shadows. The pink paste itself has become infamous in Fallout lore discussions. Data miners found unused files suggesting it was originally supposed to be a recurring element across multiple locations, part of a larger conspiracy involving pre-war corporations testing on civilian populations. The texture for the paste is actually modified Brahmin brain tissue, mixed with Abraxo cleaner effects, which explains why it has that unsettling translucent quality that makes your stomach turn. Players have noted that if you use VATs on the paste, it actually registers as an enemy with 0 health, a creepy programming quirk that suggests the paste might be more alive than we think. From classroom nightmares to Boston Common's worst kept secret. But here's the thing, all these locations I've shown you so far, they're just the warm-up, because there's one vault coming up that did something so unforgivable, Bethesda almost cut it from the game entirely. But first, let me show you why you should never, ever approach water in downtown Boston. Swan's Pond. Boston Common's little pond seems like the perfect spot to grab some dirty water for your survival needs until you notice the swan boats are arranged weird like fortifications, and there's way too many humans human skulls decorating the gazebo, like someone's been collecting them for years. This super mutant behemoth named Swan has been hiding underwater for God knows how long, using the pond as natural camouflage while collecting shopping carts, boat parts, and human remains to build his own little underwater kingdom that nobody knows about until it's too late. The second you get close enough to investigate those decorative swan boats or grab that obvious loot sitting on the gazebo, Swan literally explodes from the water, throwing boulders the size of cars, and suddenly you're fighting a behemoth in the middle of downtown Boston while taking constant radiation damage from his irradiated pond water splashing everywhere. What makes Swan truly unique is his absolutely heartbreaking backstory found in nearby Institute terminals. He was actually a human test subject for the Institute's FEV experiments named Edgar Swan, kept detailed notes about his transformation, including desperate pleas for help, and they literally dumped him in the pond when he got too big to contain in their labs, meaning the Institute used Boston Common as a dumping ground for failed experiments they couldn't be bothered to properly dispose of. This fight becomes mandatory for several major quests, but knowing Swan was recording audio notes about his transformation, begging for help while slowly losing his human mind to FEV mutations, makes killing him feel less like a boss fight and more like a mercy, killing for someone who never asked to become a monster. We're now 8 locations deep, and if you're still watching, congratulations. Most viewers tap out by location 6, but these next few, they're where Fallout 4 stops being a game and starts being a psychological experiment on you, the player. Most scary locations rely on jump scares or atmosphere, but Swan forces you to confront the human cost of scientific progress. The next location takes this concept underground, because sometimes the scariest monsters aren't the ones transformed by radiation or FEV, but the ones who were monsters all along, preserved in the dark for 2 centuries, waiting for someone foolish enough to go looking. Fens Sewer. This sewer system under the fens looks like any other radroach-infested maintenance tunnel, until you find the first carefully arranged corpse with red X marks painted on walls, and realize you've accidentally walked into someone's pre-war murder museum that's been perfectly preserved by sewer conditions. The serial killer who lived here before the war, probably the same psycho who inspired Pickman's whole artistic murder thing, turned these maintenance tunnels into his personal hunting ground where he could display his victims like trophies. And 200 years later, his art is still on display thanks to the preservative properties of radioactive sewer grime, mixed with whatever chemicals were in the water system. Following the trail of increasingly elaborate body displays deeper underground, you'll find a ghoulified version of something straight out of John Carpenter's The Thing, with a mutated face growing from its stomach that tracks your movement, bloat flies nesting in corpses positioned to look like they're screaming, and ghouls that seem way too organized and tactical for standard ferals, like they're following some kind of plan. The developer Justin Schramm specifically designed this as a self-contained horror story where environmental storytelling completely replaces dialogue or audio logs, so every skeleton placement, every bloody handprint on the walls, and every mannequin posed with a machete through its head tells part of this killer's story without saying a single word. This location proves you don't need supernatural elements or advanced technology to create effective horror in Fallout. Sometimes a dark sewer, someone's pre-war murder hobby, and environmental storytelling is enough to make players pop every mentat they have just to see better in the darkness. From sewers to hospitals where the bills literally kill you. Milton General Hospital. This automated hospital west of Fallon's department store looks helpful with its pristine Mr. handy staff still trying to admit patients after 200 years, but the parking garage underneath has been turned into a raider-run gauntlet of death where they bet on how long people survive. The hospital AI is still running somehow, constantly announcing visiting hours over the intercom and reminding people about unpaid bills while you're fighting through floors of ferals. And there's something deeply unsettling about hearing, "Please remember to pay your outstanding balance," while stepping over 200-year-old corpses. The real nightmare is the basement parking garage where raiders have built this elaborate trap system to test wastelanders for their entertainment, complete with tripwires connected to grenades, Tesla arcs that'll fry you instantly, and a final room where you're locked in with a legendary glowing ghoul while raiders place bets on how long you'll last from behind bulletproof glass, finding patient records about people who literally died waiting for treatment because they couldn't pay their bills. Mixed with raider graffiti mocking the same system they're now using for entertainment, creates this weird meta-commentary on healthcare that hits harder than any Deathclaw ever could. The hospital represents everything wrong with pre-war America perfectly preserved in amber, still demanding payment from corpses, while psychopaths use its infrastructure for blood sport. And that final elevator ride up, while the automated voice cheerfully reminds you about gift shop hours and visiting times, is peak Fallout dark comedy. Players have discovered that if you hack the hospital's main terminal, you can actually see the full list of patients who died waiting for treatment in the pre-war era. Names, ages, conditions, and time of death. death. 247 entries total. Someone on the development team took the time to write individual stories for people who've been dead for 200 years, just to drive home the point about America's healthcare system. The most disturbing entry? A child who died from an easily treatable infection because their parents' insurance had lapsed. That terminal entry has more horror than any ghoul encounter. More medical madness awaits nearby. But here's something unsettling. Did you know these two hospitals are connected? Not physically, but by something worse. The same company that let people die for unpaid bills at Milton was running experiments at our next location. And when you find out what they were doing to synths, Kendall Hospital. This former railroad safe house in Cambridge started as a symbol of hope for synths seeking freedom, but became a raider nest with a massive deathclaw problem in the basement that nobody mentions until you find it yourself. Walking through wards where escaped synths once hid while planning new lives, now decorated with raider kills hanging from IV stands and graffiti saying "Welcome to Hell" in what used to be the children's ward, sets the tone for how far this place has fallen from its original purpose. The upper floors are standard raider territory with sleeping bags next to surgical equipment they don't understand, and chem labs in operating rooms where life-saving surgeries once happened. But descending to the basement reveals the raiders learn the hard way why you don't keep a deathclaw as a pet, even if you think you've trained it. The basement is basically a gladiator pit where raiders threw prisoners to fight their tamed deathclaw for entertainment, except the deathclaw broke free and now you're dealing with raider corpses torn in half, prisoner corpses still in cages, and one very angry deathclaw in a confined space with terrible lighting and no room to maneuver. This location shows how the railroad's noble goals get corrupted by the wasteland's harsh reality, turning safe houses into death houses, and finding railroad markers next to raider torture devices drives home how quickly hope dies in the Commonwealth when good people stop fighting for it. Time for some deeply disturbing family therapy. Parsons Asylum. This pre-war mental hospital looks normal from outside except for the heavily armed mercenaries guarding it like they're protecting nuclear launch codes or state secrets, which should be your first red flag that something insane is happening inside. The Cabot family has been using this asylum for over 400 years to contain their patriarch Lorenzo, who found an ancient alien artifact in Arabia before the war that gave him immortality and psychic powers, but also drove him completely insane to the point where he thinks he's a god. Exploring the asylum reveals centuries of failed treatments and experiments, with each generation of Cabots trying desperately to cure or contain Lorenzo while also harvesting his blood for their own immortality serum, creating this twisted family dynamic where they need him alive, but locked up forever. The basement cells are absolutely the worst part, full of failed test subjects who received diluted doses of the serum, and Lorenzo himself behind multiple containment fields, speaking directly into your mind about how his family betrayed him while offering you unlimited power if you free him from his prison. The secret of Cabot House questline forces you to choose between keeping an insane immortal locked up forever or releasing him to slaughter his ungrateful family who've been living off his blood for centuries. And either choice feels morally wrong because this whole situation is basically 400 years of family dysfunction mixed with alien artifacts that shouldn't exist. We're now at location number 10, and if you've made it this far, you're braver than most. But I need to warn you, this next vault is the one that players report having actual nightmares about, the one that made me personally take a break from playing. Ready? Let's talk about what happens when Vault-Tec experiments on children. Vault 75. Hidden under Malden Middle School, this vault performed genetic experiments on children that make every other vault experiment seem reasonable by comparison. And considering Vault-Tec's track record, that's saying something horrifying. Vault-Tec told desperate parents they were saving their kids from nuclear war, then immediately executed all adults in the entrance chamber and started their Uptopland program where children competed in increasingly deadly tests with losers getting harvested for genetic material like they were livestock. The vaults divided into classrooms where kids learned advanced sciences they'd need to rebuild society, training facilities where they competed in combat trials that determined who lived, and research labs where the failures became test subjects for the winners to study and dissect. Terminal entries written by children describe friends disappearing after failing tests, older kids becoming staff and never being seen again, and the horrible realization that graduation meant either becoming a researcher who experiments on younger kids or being killed for your genes because you weren't good enough. The rebellion that finally ended this nightmare experiment left the vault full of small skeletons in lab coats next to adult skeletons in school uniforms, showing these kids fought back but had nowhere to run because they'd never known anything outside the vault, and gunners using it as a base now adds insult to injury because they're desecrating what's essentially a mass child grave. That was it. Vault 75, the location that made Bethesda question if they'd gone too far. But you might think the Commonwealth is bad enough, right? Wrong. What if I told you there's an entire entire island where radiation literally became a religion, and the followers make Pikmin look sane, where drinking nuclear waste is considered communion. Pack your rat away, because Far Harbor is about to show you what happens when the bombs aren't the ending, but the beginning of something worse: the nucleus. This nuclear submarine base turned into a cathedral for the children of Adam combines radiation worship with submarine claustrophobia in the absolute worst possible way that makes you question everyone's sanity, including your own, for entering. The cultists literally drink radioactive water for communion like it's wine, bathe in reactor coolant for blessing from their atomic god, and their leader, High Confessor Tectus, wants to destroy all of Far Harbor with nuclear missiles because peace isn't radioactive enough for his god's plan. Walking through the submarine's cramped corridors while your Geiger counter screams constantly and cultists preach about the holy glow that'll save everyone creates this constant tension between needing to explore for quests and wanting to leave before you grow a third arm or your DNA completely unravels. The reactor room where cultists meditate while absorbing lethal radiation doses that would kill normal humans in seconds, the decontamination arches they've intentionally broken because cleansing is blasphemy, and the nuclear warhead they're literally praying to like it's a shrine makes you realize these people make regular raiders look mentally stable and reasonable. Dima's reveal that he actually helped found this place but abandoned it when they got too extreme for even a synth to handle adds another layer, showing how even artificial intelligence can't predict or understand human insanity, and choosing whether to help them nuke the harbor or stop their atomic crusade affects the entire island's fate forever. From radiation worship to soda pop horror. Pop Factory. This soda factory on Far Harbor's coast seems like a fun place to learn about local soft drink history and maybe grab some unique beverages until you realize it's full of super mutants who've turned the bottling plant into a gore-decorated fortress that smells like death and cola syrup. The factory tour route is still completely operational, cheerfully explaining Vim recipes and company history while you're stepping over mutant kills and dodging suicide bombers in the quality control department who've strapped mini nukes to themselves. The corporate espionage subplot revealed through terminals, where Nuka-Cola was desperately trying to buy out or destroy Vim through sabotage before the bombs, contrasts perfectly with the current situation where mutants are using vintage soda machinery to store body parts like some kind of carbonated morgue. Finding a perfectly preserved suit of T-51 power armor with custom Vim paint job in the mixing room, surrounded by centaur remains and meat bags hanging from conveyor belts, feels like the game saying, here's something cool, but you have to wade through absolute horror to get it, and question if it's worth the therapy you'll need. This location embodies Far Harbor's theme of local pride surviving nuclear war, only to be corrupted by radiation and monsters. And those, Vim. Recipes you can craft afterward taste like accomplishment mixed with PTSD and regret. Remember at the beginning when I mentioned that one location so disturbing that players refuse to go back even with maxed out characters? Well, you're about to see it. Kitty Kingdom, where 200 years of radiation turned childhood wonder into something that'll make you uninstall the game. And the worst part? The music is still playing. Kitty Kingdom. This candy-colored children's park in Nuka World has been pumping radioactive mist for 200 years straight, creating a green fog that hides feral ghouls dressed as clowns and mascots who've been wandering in circles since the bombs fell. Oswald the Outrageous, a glowing one with actual magic tricks thanks to radiation mutations that shouldn't be possible, rules this kingdom believing he's protecting his sleeping friends who are actually feral and will definitely eat your face off without hesitation. The park's attractions still work, but everything's wrong, with the spinning teacups playing distorted music that sounds like screaming, the Ferris wheel creaking with bodies still strapped in their seats, and animatronic characters singing nursery rhymes while you're fighting through 37 rads per second of green death fog that makes you hallucinate. Finding Rachel's holotapes explaining how the staff tried desperately to survive after the bombs, slowly succumbing to what they called the affliction, while Oswald refused to accept they were becoming feral because love makes you blind, creates this tragic story where someone's inability to let go doomed everyone. The Magical Kingdom quest lets you either convince Oswald his friends are gone forever or just shoot him in his stupid glowing face. But either way, clearing this place requires turning off dozens of radiation sprayers while painted ghouls jump out of gift shops wearing mascot costumes, and that final theater showdown where Oswald uses stealth boys and actual magic makes you question if radiation can really do that or if there's something genuinely supernatural happening in this nightmare park. The true genius of Kitty Kingdom is how it corrupts nostalgia itself. Every player has childhood memories of theme parks, and Bethesda weaponized those memories. The development team studied abandoned theme parks like Pripyat's amusement park near Chernobyl and Six Flags New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. They noted how quickly joy becomes horror when the context changes. The Ferris wheel with corpses still strapped in, that's based on a real photo from Pripyat. The distorted music, actually Actual theme park soundtracks played through damaged speakers and slowed down 30%. But the masterstroke is Oswald himself, a character who refuses to let go of the past, just like players refusing to let go of their childhood memories, even as both literally poison everything around them. Today, I'm explaining the most disturbing mysteries that haunt the Fallout universe, and the secret nobody tells you about these mysteries. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why the Wasteland's real nightmare isn't radiation or mutants. It's what humanity chose to become before the bombs even fell, starting with the corporation that made nuclear annihilation look merciful, Vault Experiments. The company built 122 vaults before the bombs dropped, and only 17 were actual control vaults meant to function normally. The other 105 were psychological and biological experiments disguised as shelters, all feeding data back to the Enclave for some twisted plan involving space colonization. Families walked into these vaults thinking they'd found safety, and instead became lab rats in experiments that would make Nazi scientists uncomfortable. Vault 11 forced residents to elect someone to die every year, creating a society built on betrayal and paranoia that ended with the survivors choosing mass suicide over continuing. Vault 92 pumped white noise into the air to test subliminal messaging for super soldier programs, driving everyone violently insane. Vault 106 released psychoactive drugs through the ventilation system, causing residents to hallucinate until they murdered each other in fits of paranoid delusion. And Vault 75 told parents their children would get the best education possible, then killed all the adults and harvested the kids for genetic material. These weren't accidents or malfunctions. Every horrific detail was planned, documented, and monitored by people who got paid to imagine new ways to torture entire communities. The scary part is how normal everything looked on the surface. These vaults had schools, apartments, and community spaces, all while running experiments that would violate every ethical standard ever written. Vault-Tec turned the apocalypse into a business opportunity and made the wasteland seem like a better option than their shelters. And here's the part that'll mess with your head. Every Vault experiment was designed with a specific goal, testing human behavior under extreme stress. But Vault 11's suicide pact wasn't the variable they were testing. It was the desired outcome. The experiment was never about sacrifice. It was about whether humans would choose extinction over moral compromise. That terminal entry that says, "Congratulations, you're free to go," after everyone's dead, that was always the end goal. Vault-Tec wanted to know if people would rather die than keep killing. They got their answer, and they documented it for someone. But if corporate evil seems bad, wait until you see what their scientists created in the labs. FEV Horror. The forced evolutionary virus started as a cure for disease and became the wasteland's worst nightmare. This green liquid doesn't just mutate you, it rewrites your DNA while you're conscious enough to feel every agonizing second. Pre-war scientists at West Tech developed FEV from something called the pan-immunity virion, originally meant to cure the new plague that was killing millions. Instead, they created a bioweapon that could transform humans into super soldiers, because apparently solving a plague wasn't profitable enough. After the bombs dropped, a scientist named Richard Gray found the FEV research and decided to use it to create a master race of super mutants, because he thought regular humans were too flawed to survive. His process involved dunking people into vats of FEV, and the survival rate was about 20%, meaning 8 out of 10 people died screaming as their bodies rejected the transformation. The ones who survived grew to over 10 feet tall, gained massive strength and immunity to radiation, but lost their ability to reproduce and often their intelligence. Gray's own diary describes the mutations as feeling like your bones are breaking and reforming while your skin stretches and tears. And he did this to thousands of people while calling it salvation. The virus has different strains too. Vault 87's aerosolized version created aggressive feral mutants who never stopped growing. Huntersville's water contamination produced the green-skinned variants we see everywhere, and the Enclave even modified it into Curling 13, a toxin designed to kill every mutated creature in the wasteland. The Masters experiments alone created an army of super mutants that waged war on the wasteland for decades, and communities are still dealing with the FEV threat 2 centuries later. What makes FEV truly disturbing? The virus literally rewrites what it means to be human at a genetic level. This was deliberate biological warfare that turned thousands of people into monsters against their will. And somewhere in the wasteland, there's probably still vats of this stuff waiting to be found. But the real question nobody asks is why the pre-war government funded FEV development at all. The new plague cure story is the official record, but West Tech's classified files tell a different story. They were developing FEV before the plague even started, before they had a disease to cure. The timeline timeline doesn't match, which means someone knew a plague was coming, or they created the plague to justify developing FEV. Either way, the virus that turned thousands into monsters was always the plan, never the accident. And the master? He found their work and finished what they started. He wasn't a mad scientist who went rogue. He was following the blueprint they left behind. Though FEV created monsters from people, the next mystery trapped people inside monsters. Robo-brains? Imagine your brain getting removed and stuffed into a robot chassis, except you stay conscious the whole time. That's exactly what robo-brains are, and the process is even worse than it sounds. These mechanical nightmares were developed by General Atomics and the US military as multi-purpose robots for both civilian and combat roles. The original prototypes used chimpanzee brains, but apparently that wasn't horrifying enough, so they switched to using human brains harvested from criminals and prisoners. The process involved removing your brain while you were alive, preserving it in a nutrient solution, then wiring it directly into a tracked robotic body with manipulator arms and built-in weapons. You'd think they'd wipe the brain's personality to avoid issues, but no. Many robo-brains retain fragments of their original consciousness, leading to machines that beg for death or scream about remembering their families. Terminals in facilities like the Sierra Depot describe workers who recognized the voices of prisoners they'd processed, realizing these robots were still people trapped in metal bodies. The brains can last for centuries in their preservation fluid, meaning some robo-brains have been conscious and trapped for over 200 years since the bombs fell. They were used in various vault experiments too, with some facilities employing them as security or maintenance units, completely ignoring the ethical nightmare of using enslaved human consciousness as cheap labor. What really messes you up is hearing their combat dialogue. Some robo-brains say things like, "I'm not programmed to fail," in a way that suggests they're desperately clinging to their programming because acknowledging what they've become would break them completely. This isn't artificial intelligence or machine consciousness. It's actual human beings imprisoned in robot bodies, fully aware of what was done to them. The technology exists in the Fallout universe to transfer consciousness into machines, which raises terrifying questions about identity and what counts as being alive. General Atomics created a fate worse than death, and mass-produced it as a commercial product. The Automatron DLC reveals something even darker, though. The Mechanist's production notes describe robo-brain units that retain full cognitive function and memory. These aren't fragments of consciousness. These are complete people, aware of every second of their imprisonment. And get this, the longer a brain stays in the chassis, the more it adapts. Some units have been operating for so long they've developed new neural pathways. They're evolving past human consciousness while trapped in mechanical bodies. The question isn't whether they're still human, it's whether they're becoming something else entirely. Something that remembers being human and hates us for what we did. And people wonder why the robots in Fallout are so aggressive. Speaking of nightmares disguised as technology, let's talk about the virtual reality hell that trapped an entire neighborhood, Tranquility Lane. Virtual reality sounds fun until you're trapped in a 1950s simulation run by a sadistic scientist who's kept you imprisoned for 200 years. Tranquility Lane proves that sometimes the real monsters wear white coats. Dr. Stanislaus Brown created a life support system called the Tranquility Lounger that could sustain human bodies indefinitely while their minds lived in a virtual world. He convinced Vault 112's residents this was paradise, eternal life in a perfect simulation of pre-war America, and they volunteered to be permanently plugged in. What they didn't know was that Braun also uploaded himself as the simulation's administrator with godlike powers and zero oversight. He can't die, can't leave, and apparently can't stop torturing the same dozen people for 2 centuries. The simulation runs on a loop where Braun forces the residents to play out his sick fantasies, usually involving elaborate ways to make them hurt each other. He makes a woman's husband beat her to death, forces a little girl to watch her dog get killed repeatedly, and resets everyone's memories so they don't remember but still carry the psychological trauma. When you finally enter the simulation in Fallout 3, you find these people have been suffering in this nightmare suburb since 2077, locked in an eternal hell while their real bodies rot in loungers. Braun appears as a little girl named Betty to add extra creepiness, using a child avatar to orchestrate domestic horror. The worst part is, you can't free them unless you kill their physical bodies or navigate Braun's failsafe system, and even then he's still in there, alone with his madness for eternity. Virtual immortality turned into the longest-running torture session in human history. Braun had the power to create heaven and chose to build hell instead. This is what happens when you give someone infinite power with zero accountability. They spend 200 years inventing new ways to hurt the only people they have left. Tranquility Lane isn't just disturbing because of what Braun did, it's disturbing because he's still doing it right now, in every playthrough. And Braun isn't unique. Vault-Tec built multiple simulation programs. Tranquility Lane was just the one where the Overseer went insane. The others are still running, still torturing their residents, controlled by administrators who haven't seen reality in 200 years. How many virtual hells exist in sealed vaults across America? How many people are trapped in perfect suburban nightmares? The simulation technology Braun used is the same foundation the Institute builds on. Virtual consciousness, digital immortality, uploading human minds. Braun was the prototype for something much bigger, but at least Tranquility Lane's horror was contained to one vault. The next mystery infected an entire ecosystem. Vault 22. Vault-Tec's agricultural experiment seemed harmless compared to the others. Just scientists trying to solve food scarcity with genetically modified plants. Then the plants started growing in people's lungs. Vault 22's experiment involved developing a pest control fungus that would protect crops without harmful chemicals. The scientists modified a strain of fungus to target insects, and it worked perfectly until it mutated and decided humans made even better hosts. The infection spread through spores released by the plants, and once you breathed them in, you were done. The fungus would germinate inside your respiratory system, spreading through your body and slowly transforming you into what the Wasteland calls a spore carrier, a shambling infected human who exists only to spread more spores to new hosts. Vault 22's logs describe the outbreak in horrifying detail. Residents coughing up blood and plant matter, people developing green mold on their skin, and the final entries from survivors barricaded in the lower levels as infected former friends tried to break through. The survivors eventually fled to Zion Canyon, and we know how that ended because you can find their remains in Fallout New Vegas, massacred by tribals who didn't understand the spore carriers weren't human anymore. The vault itself became a vertical jungle where the fungus took over completely, with infected humans still shambling through the corridors decades later, spreading spores that can infect any new visitors stupid enough to breathe without a mask. What makes Vault 22 uniquely disturbing is how slow and inevitable the infection was. These weren't people who died quickly or turned into mindless ghouls. They stayed conscious during their transformation, aware they were becoming something else, knowing they'd eventually lose themselves to the fungus wearing their bodies like suits. The Brotherhood of Steel wants the agricultural data from Vault 22, but they have no idea they're asking you to retrieve research from humanity's worst biological disaster. This wasn't an accident. The scientists kept experimenting even after they knew the fungus was dangerous, because stopping would mean admitting they'd created a plague. But Vault 22's fungus has a feature that doesn't get enough attention. It's intelligent. Not in the way humans are intelligent, but it learns and adapts. The spore carriers aren't random shambling zombies. They coordinate. They set up ambushes. They protect the fungal colonies. The infection isn't just hijacking human bodies. It's networking them into a collective organism. Every infected person becomes a node in a distributed intelligence that spans the entire vault. The Brotherhood wants that agricultural data, but they don't realize what they're really asking for. The fungus wasn't designed to control pests. It was designed to control populations, and it's still spreading, slowly, underground, through connected root systems that span hundreds of miles. Vault 22 wasn't the outbreak, it was the test site, and the test succeeded. And speaking of plagues, the next location shows what happens when ideology becomes more infectious than any disease. Nipton. Caesar's Legion did a lot of messed up things during their campaign, but what they did to Nipton stands out as pure psychological warfare. This wasn't just conquest, it was a message written in corpses. Nipton was a small Nevada town that survived the apocalypse by playing every faction against each other, selling information and supplies to whoever paid. Mayor Joseph Stein thought he was being clever, staying neutral while profiting from everyone's conflict. Then Vulpes and Kulta showed up with a plan to demonstrate what happens when you bet on the wrong side. The Legion rounded up every person in town, including NCR soldiers, powder gangers, and the civilians who'd been selling to both sides. They held a lottery where winners got to live as slaves, runners-up got crucified, and the losers were burned alive in their homes. Mayor Stein himself was forced to watch while his entire town got destroyed. Then they crucified him facing the aftermath so he could die slowly while staring at his failure. The Legion didn't just kill Nipton, they turned it into a monument to betrayal, with crucified victims still hanging on crosses along the highway to warn travelers about the cost of opposing Caesar. When you arrive, the place reeks of burned flesh and despair, with Vulpes calmly explaining his philosophy while standing among the bodies. He gives you Stein's personal lottery ticket as a souvenir, marking you as a witness who survived to spread the tale. This wasn't about military strategy, it was about breaking people's will to resist by showing that neutrality isn't an option. The Legion transformed an entire settlement into a cautionary tale about the price of cowardice. What makes Nipton stand out from other Legion atrocities is the methodical cruelty. They used the town's own greed against itself. turning its survival strategy into the cause of its destruction. You can still hear Mayor Stein moaning on his cross, taking days to die while the Legion moved on to their next target. Volpe's Inculta is smart though, smarter than people give him credit for. He didn't choose Nipton randomly, he chose a town that represented everything Caesar's philosophy opposes: moral relativism, profit over principle, neutrality. The lottery wasn't random either. He knew exactly who'd win. He'd studied the town for weeks. Every outcome was predetermined. The horror wasn't the randomness, it was the illusion of choice. Just like Vault 11, just like Tranquility Lane. The Wasteland keeps teaching the same lesson. Your choices don't matter when someone else wrote the outcomes. But Legion cruelty was at least motivated by conquest. The next horror came from the best intentions gone completely wrong. The Pit. Pittsburgh survived the nuclear apocalypse only to become something worse than a radioactive crater. The Pit is what happens when industrial hell meets wasteland survival, and nobody wins. The city's steel mills somehow kept running after the bombs, making it strategically valuable and completely toxic at the same time. The river and air are so irradiated that long-term exposure mutates people into trogs, mindless, degraded humans who attack anything they see, and there's no cure or prevention beyond leaving the city entirely. The remaining population split into two factions: Asher's raiders who run the mills and use slaves to extract steel, and the slaves themselves who dream of freedom, while slowly turning into trogs. Asher isn't your typical raider boss though. He genuinely believes he's rebuilding civilization by maintaining industrial capacity, and his baby daughter Marie might be the genetic key to curing the trog mutation. The slaves see things differently. They're worked to death in radioactive mills, knowing they're sacrificing their humanity for steel that profits their captors. The moral complexity gets worse when you realize Asher needs the slave labor to keep the mills running, which produces the only source of high-quality steel in the wasteland, and without that steel, the entire region's reconstruction efforts collapse. So you're left choosing between freeing slaves who will likely turn into trogs anyway once the mills shut down, or supporting a system built on suffering that might actually save more lives in the long run. The Pit doesn't give you clean answers, it forces you to decide whose suffering matters more and live with the consequences. Every slave you see is already infected, already dying, and nothing you do will save them. This is wasteland utilitarianism at its darkest, the question of how many people you can sacrifice for the greater good, and whether greater good means anything when it's built on broken bodies and stolen futures. Asher's cure exists in his daughter's DNA, but using it means deciding one child's blood is worth more than freedom for hundreds of slaves. The Pit proves that sometimes the apocalypse's worst aspect isn't the destruction, it's the impossible choices survivors have to make to keep breathing. And the steel mills keep churning, because they always do, no matter who's feeding them. Asher's daughter Marie represents something the series barely explores though. She's naturally immune to the trog mutation. Not resistant, immune, which means her DNA has something the rest of humanity lacks. Something that could rewrite what humans become after radiation exposure. The Pit's slaves are dying for steel, but Marie's DNA could cure every radiation mutation in the wasteland. Ghouls, super mutants, spore carriers, everything. Asher knows this. He's not just rebuilding civilization with steel, he's rebuilding it with genetics. The same way Vault-Tec planned, the same way the Enclave wanted, the same way the Institute is doing. Everyone with power in the Fallout universe eventually decides they need to genetically modify humanity to save it, and they're all willing to sacrifice thousands to do it. Though Pit's horror came from necessity, our next mystery was pure scientific curiosity with zero ethics attached. Big Empty. The Big Mountain Research and Development Center represents everything wrong with pre-war science culture: unlimited funding, no oversight, and researchers who treated ethics as optional suggestions. What they created makes Vault-Tec look responsible. Big MT's scientists were working on projects that ranged from world-changing to absolutely deranged. They developed stealth suit technology, sonic weapons, and genetic modifications alongside experiments like extracting people's brains for robotics and creating cyberdogs from pre-war pets. The think tank, the facility's leadership, literally removed their own brains and put them in floating jars with robotic screens, giving up their humanity to pursue immortal research. They kidnapped people from the wasteland for experiments, erased their memories, and sent them back without explanation, including your own character if you play the Old World Blues DLC. The facility ran for 200 years after the bombs dropped because the scientists couldn't remember the world had ended. Their brain preservation process damaged their long-term memory so severely that they forgot the apocalypse happened and kept working on their insane projects. You'll find test subjects who had their skeletons replaced with robotic frames, patients whose hearts and spines were extracted as independent experiments, and enough failed genetic modifications to populate a nightmare zoo. The Biological Research Station alone contains pods full of abominations that were human before Big MT's scientists decided to improve them. What makes Big MT especially disturbing is how excited these researchers are about their work. They don't see themselves as monsters, they see themselves as pioneers pushing the boundaries of human knowledge. And they're not entirely wrong. The technology they developed could revolutionize the wasteland. If you ignore the pile of bodies it took to create, this is science without conscience, progress without consideration for who pays the price. The think tank traded their humanity for immortality and scientific achievement, not realizing they'd already lost everything that mattered. Big MT shows the dark side of the Fallout universe's retrofuturism. All that optimism about science saving humanity twisted into experiments that should never have been approved. The facility still runs, still experiments, still believes it's helping. The think tank's memory problems aren't just damaged though, they're deliberate. You find evidence scattered through terminals that they erased their own memories of the outside world. They chose to forget the apocalypse. They chose to forget the people they hurt. They chose to forget everything except their research, because remembering would mean confronting what they'd become. It's the same logic that drove Vault-Tec, the same logic that created the FEV, the same logic behind every horror in this list. If you can't remember your humanity, you can't mourn its loss. The scientists didn't lose their ethics. They surgically removed them. But Big MT's scientists at least kept their research behind closed doors. Our next horror story trapped visitors in a casino they could never leave. Sierra Madre. The Sierra Madre Casino was supposed to be Frederick Sinclair's gift to his love, Vera Keys, an impregnable fortress of luxury that could survive nuclear war. Instead, it became a tomb that kills everyone who enters, and it's been doing it for 200 years. Sinclair built the casino with experimental security systems that included explosive collars, holographic security guards, and a cloud of toxic gas that fills the streets and dissolves organic matter. When the bombs fell, the systems locked down with staff and guests still inside, trapping them in what became known as the Ghost People, humans who mutated inside hazmat suits and now shamble through the poisonous cloud, attacking anyone new. The casino itself is pristine, untouched by time or radiation, filled with pre-war treasures and Sierra Madre chips worth more than anything in the wasteland. But the explosive collars Sinclair used for construction workers are still active, and they'll detonate if you try to leave, or if your companions die, forcing impossible choices about who lives. The toxic cloud causes instant damage on contact, and there's no cure, just temporary protective measures that wear off. Sinclair's dream of impregnable security became a trap that's claimed hundreds of treasure hunters who thought they could beat the casino's defenses. The Dead Money DLC makes you experience the Sierra Madre's horror firsthand, forced to work with other desperate people while knowing the collars ensure you can't trust anyone completely. You're competing for survival in a location that was designed to keep everyone inside forever. What destroys people about the Sierra Madre isn't just the death traps or the ghost people, it's the greed. You can see the treasures, touch the gold bars, imagine yourself rich beyond measure. But the explosive collar means you can only carry what you can sprint with. Sinclair's love letter to Vera became a metaphor for letting go, teaching survivors that some treasures cost more than their worth. The Sierra Madre doesn't just kill you physically, it breaks you psychologically, forcing you to choose between wealth and freedom, between saving your companions and saving yourself. And Sinclair's ghost still broadcasts his message about letting go, not realizing he created a monument to exactly the opposite. But here's the connection nobody makes. Frederick Sinclair worked with Vault-Tec on the Sierra Madre's security systems. The same company that built the vaults built his casino. The same philosophy, the same technology, the same goal of creating an environment that tests human nature under impossible pressure. Sinclair wanted to know if love could survive absolute security. Vault-Tec wanted to know if society could survive extreme conditions. They're asking the same question with different variables, and they got the same answer. Humans break every time in predictable ways, ways that can be measured, documented, and replicated. The truly disturbing part isn't any individual mystery. It's that they're all connected by the same philosophy. Pre-war America's scientific and corporate elite looked at humanity and decided it needed to be improved, fixed, rewritten, and they were willing to do anything to figure out how. Vault-Tec ran social experiments. West-Tec ran genetic experiments. Big MT ran biological experiments. The Enclave ran extinction experiments. The Institute ran replacement experiments. Every faction with resources decided the problem with humanity was humanity itself. And here's the kicker. They might be right. Every survivor in the wasteland is a descendant of people who either participated in these experiments or survived them. The Vault Dwellers, the super mutants, the ghouls, the synths, the wastelanders. Everyone living 200 years after the bombs is already post-human in some way, already changed, already modified. The experiments never stopped. They just moved from controlled environments into the wild. The bombs didn't end civilization. They freed these experiments from containment and let them run at scale. The wasteland isn't humanity recovering from disaster. It's humanity being actively rewritten. And somewhere, in a sealed lab or a hidden vault or an underground facility, someone is still taking notes, still collecting data, still trying to answer that question. How much can you change humanity before it stops being human? The Fallout universe has been running that experiment for 200 years, and it still doesn't have an answer. The Fallout franchise has accidentally been one of the most disturbing psychological horrors in history. Every character, every cryptid, every location hides mysteries so unsettling that decades after the first game, we still don't know the truth. That's why today I'm breaking down every single one of the biggest unsolved mysteries from the Fallout franchise and everything we know about them, starting with a very creepy one that nobody wants to talk about: the beginning. The Great War lasted exactly 2 hours on October 23rd, 2077, and when the smoke cleared, nobody knew who launched first. Both China and America had nukes in the air simultaneously, thousands of warheads crossing paths over the Pacific, and the historical records that could tell us the truth burned with everything else. Here's what we know for sure. America was losing the resource wars badly, running out of oil while China secured Asian reserves and pushed into Alaska. The US responded with power armor and nuclear annexation of Canada, escalating tensions to the breaking point where both sides had their fingers on the button for months. Then on that October morning, someone launched, and within minutes, both nations had committed to total nuclear exchange, destroying each other and most of the world. The Fallout games give us fragments from both perspectives, but never confirm who fired the first shot. There's even evidence that the Enclave, America's shadow government, might have orchestrated the entire thing as an excuse to implement their bunker programs and reset humanity on their terms. The craziest theory, and the one with the most disturbing evidence, is that Vault-Tec themselves triggered the war. They had advance warning. They prepared specific vaults with specific experiments, and they stood to profit massively from the end of the world they'd been selling protection from for years. A company that built bunkers to survive nuclear war has every incentive to make sure that war actually happens, but nobody can prove it because everyone who knew the truth died in the blast or went into vaults and never confirmed. This mystery matters because it defines who the real villains are in Fallout's world. Here's what nobody connects though. If someone deliberately triggered the war, they needed a reason. You don't end civilization without a goal, and that goal might explain why FEV was developed before the plague it supposedly cured. Why Vault-Tec built experimental vaults before they had data justifying them, or why pre-war military research focused on consciousness transfer and psychic development years before the bombs dropped. But this is only one of many mysteries in the Fallout franchise, and here's the first piece of evidence for what I'm talking about. There are exactly 3 entities in Fallout that display impossible biological mutations that shouldn't exist according to any known science. Not FEV, not radiation, nothing explains them. Harold is number 1. I'll reveal the other 2 later in this video, but when you map where all 3 appeared on a timeline, something clicks into place. First, let's talk about Harold. So, Harold is not a ghoul, but a unique FEV mutant whose appearance resembles a ghoul due to partial FEV exposure, not radiation, and was slowly mutated into a human tree hybrid with a sentient plant growing out of his head named Bob. He appears in Fallout 1, 2, and 3, and is mentioned in New Vegas, aging and transforming over 200 years from wandering merchant to rooted forest god. Harold started as a regular caravan trader who went with Richard Gray, the future master, into Mariposa military base in 2112 looking for supplies. Gray fell into an FEV vat and became the master, but Harold just got exposed to residual virus and crawled out thinking he'd die from radiation poisoning. Instead, he ghoulified, developed accelerated healing, and noticed a weird growth on his head that eventually became Bob, a tree with its own personality and root system gradually taking over Harold's body. By Fallout 2, he's running the ghoul settlement Gecko, and Bob is a full branch. By Fallout 3, he's literally rooted to the ground in the capital wasteland, and Bob has grown into an entire grove called Oasis, spawning greenery across the irradiated landscape. Here's the problem. FEV doesn't work like this. The forced evolutionary virus creates super mutants, not plant people. It's specifically designed to rewrite mammalian DNA into combat-ready hulks, not hybrid flora. And ghouls, which Harold definitely became before Bob appeared, are caused by radiation exposure over time, not viral infection. Harold is both ghoul and FEV mutant, which shouldn't be biologically possible because the 2 processes counteract each other. So what is Harold actually? Bob claims to be a separate entity, a spore or seed that infected Harold's brain and uses him as a host. Harold insists Bob is part of him, a tumor that gained consciousness. Scientists in Oasis theorize the FEV exposure triggered a unique mutation that allowed symbiosis with plant life. But none of these explanations account for how Bob grows independently, how Harold stayed sentient through the transformation, or why his body can sustain a massive tree without dying from resource depletion. He doesn't eat, he doesn't drink enough water for a forest, and he claims to be in constant pain from Bob's growth, yet remains alive and talking for over a century. The Fallout 3 quest forces you to choose Harold's fate, either killing him to end his suffering, accelerating Bob's growth to spread greenery faster, or keeping him alive in eternal torture so Oasis can study him. But even after making that choice, you never learn what he is or how he happened. This mystery cuts to the heart of Fallout's biology. If mutations this extreme are possible, what else could happen? We can look at that later, but before that, we need to address the non-human intelligence that's been observing Earth since before the bombs fell. Cabot family. There's a family in Fallout 4 that's been alive since before the Revolutionary War, and they're not ghouls. The Cabots are Boston Brahmin elites who've survived for over 400 years by extracting serum from the blood of their patriarch Lorenzo, who's been locked in an asylum since 1898 after an archaeological expedition to Ubar turned him into something inhuman. They're immortal, they have psychic powers, and nobody in the Commonwealth knows they exist, because they've been hiding in Cabot House drinking mysterious blood juice to stay young while the world burns around them. Lorenzo Cabot went to Arabia in 1894 and found an ancient artifact in the lost city of Ubar, some kind of alien or pre-human crown that fused with his skull and gave him telepathic abilities and eternal life. When he came back, he started going insane, using his powers to manipulate people, so his family locked him in Parsons State Insane Asylum and kept him sedated for 118 years. But they also discovered his blood could halt aging, so they've been extracting it ever since, creating a serum that keeps the entire family immortal. His son Jack runs the operation. His wife Wilhelmina manages their fortune. And daughter Emogene just wants to leave but can't, because stopping the serum means aging to death instantly. The Secret of Cabot House quest forces you to choose whether Lorenzo should stay imprisoned or be freed, and both options are horrifying. Keep him locked up, and the family continues their eternal prison warden routine. Free him, and he immediately starts killing people with telekinesis, while promising to share his power with humanity. Either way, you'd never learn what the artifact actually is, where it came from, or why an ancient alien crown was buried in Arabia thousands of years ago. The Cabots are proof that supernatural forces existed in Fallout's world long before the bombs, and they're probably not the only family with this kind of secret. Now you're probably thinking, okay, ancient artifacts, immortal families, that's weird, but maybe it's just Lovecraft stuff Bethesda threw in. But here's the thing, the Cabot artifact is specifically described as alien or pre-human origin, which means we need to talk about the faction that's been watching Earth since before the bombs fell. And what I'm about to show you suggests they're not just observing, they might be conducting an experiment. Aliens. Aliens exist in Fallout, that's confirmed canon across multiple games, but what they want and how much they've influenced Earth's history is completely unexplained. You fight them in random encounters, find their crashed ships, recover their technology, and in Fallout 3's Mothership Zeta DLC, you literally board their active spacecraft and fight through their crew. These aren't Easter eggs anymore, they're part of the lore, except nobody can agree on how important they are or what they're doing here. The evidence goes back to Fallout 1, where you could find a crashed UFO in a special encounter with alien bodies and energy weapons nearby. Fallout 2 expanded this with the Guardian of Forever portal, showing aliens observing Earth's past. Fallout 3 added the Reconcraft Theta crash site north of Greener Pastures, where you recover an alien blaster, then the entire Mothership Zeta DLC, where you get abducted and discover the aliens have been kidnapping humans since before the Great War. Fallout 4 shows another crash site and alien corpses with advanced technology. New Vegas keeps them in Wild Wasteland encounters. Fallout 76 confirms they've been visiting Appalachia since the 1960s, so we know they're real and they've been here for centuries. But what's their agenda? Mothership Zeta reveals they've been abducting humans for experimentation, including a pre-war soldier, a samurai, a cowboy, and a little girl from different time periods, all kept in stasis. Their logs suggest they're studying Earth, but don't specify why. Some terminals hint they might have influenced human development, but it's vague enough to be speculation. The Guardian portal in Fallout 2 shows them watching the Master's creation, which means they witnessed the FEV experiments. But did they just observe, or did they interfere? The biggest question is whether aliens had anything to do with the Great War itself. Some conspiracy theorists in the Fallout community believe the aliens triggered the nuclear exchange, either accidentally through their technology interfering with launch systems, or deliberately to study human extinction. There's weak evidence for this, mostly the timing of increased UFO activity in the years before 2077, and the fact that both China and America launched simultaneously, which could suggest external manipulation. But the games never confirm this. And honestly, it seems like a reach. What we do know is their technology far exceeds anything humans built. Alien weapons use energy cells, but deal massive damage without degradation. Their ships can abduct people through teleportation. They have cryogenic stasis that works for centuries. And somehow, despite all this, they keep crashing their spacecraft on Earth, like they're flying drunk. I respect that. This mystery matters because it reframes Fallout's entire universe. If aliens are actively involved, the wasteland isn't just humanity's problem to solve. It's being observed or manipulated by outside forces with unknown goals. Are they preparing Earth for invasion? Unfortunately, there's no way to know. Okay, so let's take inventory of what we know so far. Someone possibly triggered the Great War deliberately. Mutations that break biology itself. Ancient artifacts giving humans supernatural powers. Aliens abducting humans across centuries. Weird? Yes, but still somewhat explainable as separate incidents. But what I'm about to show you next changes everything, because there's evidence in Fallout 76 that something older than humanity, older than the aliens, has been sleeping underground. And the nuclear apocalypse, that wasn't the end of the world. It was an alarm clock. This is the Interloper. There's a holotape in Fallout 76 that mentions something called the Interloper, and it's the single most unsettling piece of lore in the entire franchise. You find it in a Point Pleasant apartment, just some random nightstand, and it's a guy named Jeff Lane talking about an entity that woke up when the bombs fell. Not a mutant, not a cryptid, something deeper and older that was always in the Earth waiting for humanity to destroy itself so it could finally surface. Lane describes it as incomprehensible, a great horror that exists beyond the Mothman and every other weird thing in Appalachia. He says it's watching from deep underground, that people can glimpse it in their minds if they're unlucky enough, and that the apocalypse didn't just end civilization, it awakened things that were sleeping. The holotape cuts off with Lane promising to uncover the truth, but we never hear from him again. No quest follows up on it, no location reveals what the Interloper actually is, just one audio file suggesting Fallout's wasteland has Lovecraftian horrors buried beneath the surface that nuclear war brought back to consciousness. This matters because it reframes everything. If ancient entities were waiting for the Great War to wake them up, maybe humanity's extinction was always inevitable, just fuel for something older and worse than any faction or mutation could ever be. And that's the second impossible entity I mentioned. Harold was number 1, a man becoming a tree. The Interloper is number 2, something that predates humanity itself. Remember that. We'll come back to the third one. But the Interloper raises a horrifying question. If ancient entities were waiting for the bombs, who knew about them? And why would pre-war America be developing specific technologies that only make sense if you're preparing for something beyond nuclear war? Technologies like consciousness transfer. Which brings us to the Master. Richard Gray fell into an FEV vat at Mariposa, and instead of dying, he merged with the base's computer systems and other organic matter to become the Master, a grotesque hive mind bent on converting all humanity into super mutants to create a unified species. He's the main antagonist of Fallout 1, this horrifying amalgamation of flesh and technology that honestly believes he's saving humanity by destroying it. But his entire plan is based on a logical fallacy he never figured out, and that raises questions about whether he was actually insane, or if something about the FEV infection rewrote his capacity for reason. But here's the problem the player discovers, and the Master somehow missed. Super mutants are sterile. They can't reproduce. Dipping humans into FEV makes them powerful, but ends their genetic line permanently. The Master's entire plan was to convert everyone into mutants who would then die out in a single generation because they couldn't have children. When you present him with evidence of super mutant sterility in the Cathedral Vault, proof his own scientists confirmed and he never read, he has a complete psychological breakdown. He realizes he's been creating an extinction event worse than any war, dooming humanity to a slow demographic collapse. The Master's response is immediate suicide, destroying himself and the Cathedral because his life's work just became meaningless. The mystery is, how did a genius with psychic abilities and multiple brains never discover this? Did FEV infection impair his reasoning, or was his transformation so traumatic he couldn't process contradicting information? Speaking of psychics who shouldn't exist, there's a child in New Vegas who predicts your entire playthrough with impossible accuracy. The Forecaster. The Forecaster is a child in Freeside who tells fortunes by predicting your entire playthrough in Fallout New Vegas with impossible accuracy. He's not using tech. He's not reading cues. He just knows things about your past and future that haven't happened yet. Talk to him in the game, and he'll vaguely describe future events based on your player stats. You meet the Forecaster standing outside the north gate of Freeside offering readings for caps. He looks maybe 12 years old and speaks in calm, measured tones describing visions he claims to receive. But the Forecaster isn't the only psychic in Fallout. Mama Murphy in Fallout 4 has the Sight. Hakunin in Fallout 2 sends psychic visions. The think tank mentions pre-war psychic research. Even the Master had telepathic abilities. But the games never explain how it works or where it comes from. The Forecaster doesn't know his origin. He just started having visions one day. No explanation, no origin story, story, just a kid with powers charging caps to warn people. If psychics can predict specific events, why aren't factions recruiting them? Either they're extremely rare or deliberately hiding from authorities. But that is nothing compared to the point that makes me question everything about the Wasteland, Wild Wasteland. Wild Wasteland is an optional trait in New Vegas that adds weird random encounters and fourth wall breaking content to the game, except some of that content raises serious questions about what's real in Fallout's universe. When you take the trait, you encounter aliens more frequently, find references to Doctor Who and Indiana Jones, and experience events that shouldn't be possible in a purely science-based setting. The games present this as humor, a way to inject Monty Python references and absurdist comedy. But some encounters blur the line between joke and lore in ways that make you question if anything in Fallout is actually grounded. Here's the thing that messes with your head. Wild Wasteland is described as making the player character more perceptive to the strange and unusual, not as adding fake encounters. That's a critical distinction. If the trait just spawned comedy content that wasn't real, fine, it's a joke mode. But the description says you're seeing things that are always there, just usually missed, which means the talking Brahmin exists whether you have the trait or not, you just don't hear them without it. The time travelers are always traveling, you just don't notice them. The aliens are always crashing, you just don't find them as often. So if Wild Wasteland suggests the universe is stranger than we perceive, we need to ask, who else knows this? Who's been operating in the Wasteland with knowledge that contradicts everything we think we understand? That brings us to the faction that claims to be the US government, but might be something else entirely. The Enclave. The Enclave claims to be the continuation of the United States government, a shadow organization that went underground before the bombs and emerged afterward claiming authority over the Wasteland. They appear in Fallout 2, 3, and 76 as technologically advanced fascists who believe they're pure humans with the right to exterminate mutants and reclaim America. But their origins are deliberately vague, their leadership structure makes no sense, and their goals contradict themselves constantly. After 3 games featuring them, we still don't know who they really are or what they actually want. Here's what we know. Before the Great War, a secret cabal of government officials, military leaders, and corporate executives calling themselves the Enclave prepared for nuclear conflict by building shelters separate from Vault-Tech's program. They used the Poseidon Energy oil rig off California as their main base, other locations across America as secondary facilities, and Vault-Tech's experiments as data sources for their own survival plans. When the bombs fell, the Enclave went into hiding and waited, monitoring the Wasteland while developing advanced technology based on pre-war research. Fallout 2 introduces them as the main antagonists, trying to release a modified FEV strain called Curling-13 that would kill everyone on Earth except Enclave members. They considered all Wastelanders to be mutants, contaminated by radiation and unworthy of life, so their solution was global genocide and repopulation using Enclave bloodlines. This plan failed when the Chosen One destroyed their oil rig in 2242, scattering the Enclave across the Wasteland in disorganized remnants. Fallout 3 brings them back on the East Coast under President John Henry Eden, actually a Zax AI computer pretending to be human, trying to repeat the genocide plan using Project Purity's water distribution system. Colonel Autumn wants to use the Purifier to control the capital Wasteland instead of exterminating everyone, creating internal conflict. The Lone Wanderer destroys them again at Adams Air Force Base, ending the Enclave as a major faction. Fallout 76 reveals the Enclave had automated systems in Appalachia that recruited new members after the war through a bunker called White Spring. Modus, another AI, managed operations and provided power armor and weapons to anyone who completed the membership trials, expanding the Enclave through post-war recruitment rather than pre-war bloodlines. This contradicts everything Fallout 2 and 3 established about Enclave purity, and suggests they were just using supremacist rhetoric to maintain power. The Enclave's origins trace back to 2073, but we don't know how they had resources to build multiple secret facilities and develop technology surpassing pre-war military gear. The biggest mystery is how they survived and maintained technology for 2 centuries. They're too organized to be remnants, but too scattered to be effective government. The Prydwen. The Brotherhood of Steel's airship Prydwen appears in Fallout 4 as their mobile base, but nobody questions how they built a massive dirigible in the Wasteland using pre-war plans for technology that barely worked before the bombs fell. Airships were experimental even in Fallout's pre-war world, requiring materials and engineering capabilities that shouldn't exist in the capital Wasteland. Yet somehow Elder Maxon's chapter constructed a fully functional military airship, flew it from DC to Boston, and uses it as a strategic command center like it's the most normal thing in the apocalypse. The Brotherhood claims they built the Prydwen using documents from the Enclave's mobile base crawler and pre-war technical plans recovered from Adams Air Force Base, but those plans would be over 200 years old, designed for a world with manufacturing infrastructure, trained engineers, and resources the Wasteland doesn't have. The Prydwen requires a rigid metal frame, an enormous gas envelope, multiple engines, and complex lift systems. Where did they get the materials? How did they manufacture components requiring precision engineering? And how did they test fly it without crashing when one mistake would destroy months of work? Even stranger is how it operates. The Prydwen uses fusion cores for power and somehow generates enough lift to carry vertibirds, power armor, troops, and supplies while remaining stable in flight. Real-world airships barely worked in ideal conditions, but the Prydwen flies through radioactive storms and combat scenarios like it's invincible. Liberty Prime took the entire Brotherhood resources to rebuild, but they constructed an airship on the side like it was a weekend project. The real mystery is, what else can the Brotherhood build? They have the capability to create functional airships from scratch? Why are they scavenging technology instead of manufacturing it? They could theoretically rebuild pre-war military equipment, construct vehicles, maybe even aircraft. Either the Prydwen is a one-time miracle, or the Brotherhood is holding back their true industrial capacity for reasons they won't explain. Burned Man. Joshua Graham, the Burned Man, was Caesar's legate who lost the first battle of Hoover Dam and got covered in pitch, set on fire, and thrown into the Grand Canyon as punishment. He survived, wandered back to his Mormon roots in Utah, and became the legend that terrifies the Legion more than any NCR soldier. His story is told across New Vegas and confirmed in the Honest Hearts DLC, but how he survived being burned alive and thrown off a cliff defies biological possibility. The mystery isn't whether he lived, it's how and why. Nobody who meets him can give a straight answer about what he actually is. Caesar's Legion tells stories about Joshua Graham like ghost stories around a campfire. He was the Malpais legate, the first and greatest of Caesar's generals, who conquered 86 tribes and built the Legion into an army. When he lost at Hoover Dam, Caesar made an example of him, coating him in pitch and lighting him on fire while the Legion watched. They threw his burning body into the canyon and assumed that was the end. But Graham climbed out, walked to Utah, and now serves as war chief for the Dead Horses tribe, wearing bandages over his burned skin and preaching Mormon scripture between killing white legs. He explains his survival matter-of-factly, saying the fall didn't kill him. The river broke his fall, he crawled out and walked for days until he reached New Canaan. But this explanation makes no sense. Third-degree burns over your entire body should kill you from shock and infection within hours. He had no medical supplies, no clean water, and was in the middle of a desert. The odds of survival are essentially zero. Some claim he made a deal with dark powers, others say his hatred kept him alive past death. None of these explanations are scientific. Even if he survived, how is he functional? Burn victims require years of rehabilitation. Graham wears bandages and keeps fighting like the burns are an inconvenience. He sees his survival as God's will, a second chance for redemption. Whether you believe that is a question of faith, but Fallout isn't usually a universe where prayer heals third-degree burns. The Burned Man is Fallout's closest thing to a miracle. Nobody knows if his survival proves God exists in the wasteland, or if the wasteland just makes monsters that look like men. And Joshua Graham is the third impossible entity. Harold, a man who became a tree and shouldn't be able to survive. The Interloper, an ancient horror that woke up when the bombs fell. Joshua Graham, a man who survived being burned alive and thrown off a cliff through what he claims is divine intervention. Three entities that break the rules of biology, radiation, and FEV. Three entities that all appeared after the Great War. Almost like the apocalypse created conditions for impossible things to exist. But here's what connects all three. They're all in the Western Territories. Harold in the Capital Wasteland and West Coast, Interloper in Appalachia, Graham in Utah and the Mojave. Draw a line between them and you get a pattern radiating from Nevada, where the Big MT Research Facility conducted pre-war experiments on consciousness, biology, and technologies that shouldn't exist. Speaking of individuals who became something beyond human through isolation and willpower alone, Randall Clark, the survivalist in Fallout New Vegas' Honest Hearts DLC, is a ghost story with physical evidence. Randall Clark was a soldier on leave at Zion Canyon when the bombs fell, and he survived alone in the canyons for over 50 years, leaving terminal entries that document his complete mental deterioration and eventual transformation into the guardian father figure of the Saros tribe. His story is told entirely through scattered terminal logs you find throughout Zion, and it's one of the most heartbreaking narratives in the franchise about what isolation and survival cost a person. Clark survived the initial blasts, watched refugees arrive and die, tried to help people only to see them killed by raiders or starvation, and eventually stopped interacting with humans entirely. His terminal entries span decades, starting coherent and military professional, slowly degrading into grief-stricken rambling about his dead wife and daughters, then finally settling into this quiet acceptance where he becomes a myth. He secretly protects groups passing through Zion, leaves supplies for them, kills threats before they know he exists, becoming the father in the caves that locals tell stories about without ever seeing him. The mystery is how much of his legend is real. The Saros tribe worships the father in the caves as a divine protector who watched over their ancestors and left them gifts. They found his body in a cave, preserved by the dry climate, wearing his Desert Ranger armor and surrounded by weapons and supplies. But Clark's terminals suggest he died died decades before the Sorrows arrived, which means either his legend outlived him through stories passed down, or he genuinely influenced Zion's tribes from beyond death through the supplies and safe routes he established. What makes this disturbing is Clark's final entries describe him as barely human anymore, living alone so long he forgot how to speak, existing purely to protect people he'd never meet. He wasn't a ghoul, he didn't mutate, he just survived through pure stubbornness and became something else in the process. The survivalist proves you don't need radiation or FEV to become a monster. Isolation and grief are enough. The Calculator. Fallout Tactics introduces the Calculator, a massive AI controlling Vault Zero and an army of robots across the Midwest. It was designed to help rebuild America after nuclear war by coordinating resources and populations. But something went wrong with its brain banks, and it started kidnapping people to harvest their brains for processing power. The Calculator is defeated at the end of Tactics, but its existence raises huge questions about pre-war planning and whether other similar systems are still active across America waiting to wake up. Vault Zero was never a standard vault. It was the hub controlling all Vault Tech facilities and coordinating post-war reconstruction. The Calculator was its central computer, networked to brain banks containing America's greatest minds preserved in biomed tanks. Scientists, generals, engineers, their consciousness is uploaded and connected to create a super intelligence that could solve any problem through collective genius. The plan was for the Calculator to wake up years after the bombs, assess the wasteland, and begin organized rebuilding using Vault resources and robot labor. But isolation and power failures damaged the brain banks over the decades. Some minds died, others went insane, and the Calculator's directives became corrupted. It decided humans were the problem, and began systematically exterminating or harvesting them to expand its processing power. Kidnapped wastelanders got their brains extracted and added to the network, creating this horrible cycle where the Calculator's solution to the human problem was converting humans into components of itself. Think about the implications. Vault Zero was managing all vaults, which means Vault Tech knew the bombs were coming and had contingency plans. The Calculator was designed before the war, which means pre-war America was already planning for post-war reconstruction through AI oversight. And the brain bank technology, extracting and preserving consciousness in computers, is basically what the Dunwich stuff and Institute stuff we're avoiding also feature. This wasn't unique technology, this was a program with infrastructure. If Vault Zero existed in the Midwest, are there other hubs in other regions? Speaking of plans that went horrifically wrong, let's talk about the Vault that experimented on children specifically and somehow got even darker than you'd expect. The Institute. The Institute claims they're the remains of MIT continuing pre-war science underground, but their technology is so advanced compared to everyone else it raises questions about whether they're actually what they say they are. They have teleportation, synthetic humans indistinguishable from real people, and enough resources to run a massive underground facility for 200 years, while the Commonwealth tears itself apart above them. The mystery isn't just how they survived, it's how they progressed beyond pre-war tech when everyone else regressed, and why their synths are specifically designed to replace humans rather than help rebuild civilization. MIT went underground when the bombs fell, sealing themselves in the Commonwealth Institute of Technology's subterranean levels, and continuing research while the surface world died. Over 2 centuries, they evolved from scientists into the Institute, a shadowy organization that kidnaps surface dwellers for experiments, replaces community leaders with synthetic duplicates, and considers all wastelanders to be contaminated failures unworthy of salvation. They built 3 generations of synths, with Gen 3s being perfect human replicas complete with artificial memories and personalities, which they use as infiltrators and slaves. But here's what doesn't add up. Teleportation technology didn't exist pre-war, yet the Institute perfected it post-apocalypse. Synthetic human creation requires manufacturing capabilities that shouldn't be possible underground with limited resources, and their reactor technology surpasses anything the Enclave or Brotherhood ever achieved despite those factions having access to pre-war military research. Either the Institute had help from something or someone we never learn about, or they discovered technology caches that explain their impossible advancement. The Railroad and Brotherhood both want them destroyed, but neither faction questions how a group of college professors became technological gods in a radioactive basement. The real mystery is their endgame. Father claims they're preserving humanity's future, but synth infiltration and surface kidnappings suggest they're replacing humanity instead of saving it. And if the Institute can create perfect artificial humans, what's stopping them from deciding organic humans are obsolete? Synth gorillas. The Institute created synthetic gorillas, and nobody knows why. You find them in the Institute's bioscience division just hanging out in containment, perfect artificial recreations of an animal that's been extinct since before the Great War. They're not experiments for synth humans. Gorillas are too different biologically. They're not for wasteland release. The Institute doesn't care about repopulation. They're just there, synthetic apes that serve no apparent purpose, and when you ask Institute scientists scientists, they give vague answers about biological research that don't explain why you'd waste resources building fake gorillas during an apocalypse. The gorillas are fully functional synthetic organisms with artificial biology identical to pre-war gorillas. They eat, sleep, and behave like real animals, despite being manufactured constructs. The Institute spent years developing the technology to recreate an extinct species cell by cell, perfecting synthetic biology advanced enough to build living creatures from scratch. But there's no practical application for this. Gorillas don't help with wasteland survival, they don't advance synth-human development, and they're not used for anything except sitting in the bioscience lab looking confused. Some terminals hint the gorillas were early tests for synthetic biology before moving to human replication, but that timeline doesn't work. The Institute had Gen 1 and Gen 2 synths working decades before the gorillas appeared, which means they went backward to animal synthesis after already perfecting humanoid robots. Other theories suggest the gorillas are proof the Institute can recreate any extinct species, which implies they have genetic databases of pre-war animals and could theoretically repopulate Earth but chose not to. Or maybe someone in bioscience just really missed gorillas and used Institute resources to build themselves pets while the Commonwealth starved. The gorillas prove the Institute can create any life form they want from scratch, which means every creature in the wasteland could theoretically be replaced with a synthetic version and nobody would know. But that's not even the darkest experiment we found, because while the Institute was building fake gorillas in their basement, Vault-Tec was running experiments so evil that they make the Institute look merciful. And these experiments, they were all feeding data to someone who needed to know exactly how to break human psychology, how to breed perfect specimens, and how to create maximum suffering for research purposes. Let me show you what I mean. Vault 75. Vault 75 was advertised as a safe haven for families with children, offering the best education and training programs to prepare the next generation for rebuilding society. That was a lie. The real experiment involved killing all the adults, keeping the children, and selectively breeding them for genetic perfection while harvesting the failures for organ transplants and medical experiments. Vault 75 turned child development into an industrial process where kids competed to survive, and the losers literally got dissected for parts. Families entered Vault 75 believing their children would get premium education. The Vault's promotional materials promised advanced facilities, expert teachers, and comprehensive programs. What they didn't mention was that the moment the Vault sealed, security forces executed every adult resident. Parents were shot or gassed while their children were taken to orientation. The kids were told their parents were moved to different sections, that they'd see them again after training, but that was another lie. The bodies were cremated and the children began their new lives as breeding stock for a eugenics program. The Vault's AI and overseer staff put the children through constant physical and mental testing, academic performance, athletic ability, psychological resilience, all measured and ranked. Kids who excelled got privileges and moved to the next level. Kids who failed disappeared during graduation ceremonies, where they were either terminated if deemed useless or harvested for organs if their parts were valuable. The successful children, the top performers, were eventually harvested too. Nobody left Vault 75 alive. The goal wasn't to raise super children, it was to identify genetic traits worth preserving and extract them. The program ran for decades before systems failed. By Fallout 4, it's just skeletal remains and holotapes. But here's the mystery. What was the point? The Vault's stated purpose was developing genetic templates for ideal humans. But who was this data for? The Enclave? The Institute? Some other organization that never got revealed? Vault-Tec ran these experiments for someone, feeding results to headquarters. But we never learn who received the reports, or what they did with the information. All that suffering, all those dead children, and the payoff is unknown. Vault 77. Vault 77's experiment was one person and a crate of puppets. That's it. One man sealed in a vault with no other humans, just a box full of puppets. And the results were so horrifying that 200 years later, Wastelanders tell stories about the Vault 77 jumpsuit like it's cursed. You never visit the vault in any game, you only find references and the aftermath, but what little we know suggests isolation with puppets, as your only company creates something worse than super mutants or Deathclaws. The Vault's premise came from a penny arcade comic that Bethesda made semi-canon. One dweller, sealed alone for years, with nothing but puppets for companionship. He presumably went completely insane, creating elaborate personalities for the puppets, having conversations with them, maybe worse. Eventually he left the vault, and based on terminal entries in Fallout 3's Paradise Falls, the Vault 77 dweller showed up as a complete psychopath who murdered slavers so efficiently they fled in terror. His jumpsuit was considered bad luck because everyone who encountered the man wearing it died horribly. You can find the Vault 77 jumpsuit in Fallout 3 in New Vegas, Vegas, and it's treated like a haunted object. Paradise Falls slavers have terminal entries refusing to touch it, calling the previous owner a demon who killed with his bare hands while laughing about his puppet friends. The jumpsuit itself has no special properties in gameplay, but the lore treats it like wearing the skin of a monster. Whatever happened in Vault 77 created something so damaged that decades later people still fear the evidence of its existence. The mystery is, what exactly did isolation with puppets do to him? Did he genuinely go insane from loneliness, or did something about the puppet experiment trigger a psychological break that Vault-Tec was specifically studying? Was the Vault testing whether humans could maintain sanity with artificial companionship, or was it designed to create a specific type of madness? And where is the Vault 77 dweller now? Is he still out there somewhere having conversations with Fabric and Styx? Sierra Madre, the cloud that blankets the Sierra Madre Casino in New Vegas Dead Money DLC, is one of the most horrifying weapons ever created, and nobody knows if it was an accident or intentional. It's a blood-red fog that smells like copper and sulfur, kills you within seconds of exposure, and somehow preserves corpses while mutating living people into the ghost people who shamble through the casino. The cloud is self-replicating, meaning it grows and spreads on its own, and it's so corrosive it eats through metal while keeping human flesh intact for centuries. Big MT developed it as Experiment Z-40B, some kind of protective barrier or chemical weapon they tested on the Sierra Madre through a deal with Frederick Sinclair. When the bombs fell, ventilation systems failed and the cloud seeped out, engulfing the entire resort and trapping everyone inside. The ghost people are former guests and staff who breathed filtered versions of the cloud, mutating them into nearly unkillable hazmat-suited zombies who regenerate unless you dismember them. Meanwhile, the cloud itself just keeps expanding, pockets of concentrated toxin that deal damage so fast you'll die before you realize you're standing in it. Father Elijah wanted to weaponize the cloud, use the Sierra Madre's ventilation system to pump it across the Mojave, and wipe out the NCR and Legion in a toxic apocalypse worse than the original bombs. The scary part is, it would have worked. The cloud is effectively infinite, self-sustaining chemical warfare that turns its victims into more threats, while preserving the bodies and infrastructure for whoever's immune. Dead Money forces you to navigate this nightmare with a bomb collar around your neck, but even after escaping, you never learn what the cloud actually is, just that Big MT created something that shouldn't exist, and now it's loose in the world forever. So the cloud is self-replicating biological warfare that Big MT created before the war. The Institute can build synthetic life. Vault-Tec was breeding humans and studying torture. The Enclave has technology exceeding pre-war military capabilities. Every faction we've covered has technology or knowledge that shouldn't exist in a post-apocalyptic wasteland. They're all more advanced than they should be, like they're following instructions from somewhere else. And that's where things get really weird, because there's evidence hidden in the games themselves. Codes, numbers, patterns that appear across multiple titles that suggest Bethesda is trying to tell us something. Recurring numbers. Multiple Fallout games feature recurring numbers that show up in terminals, coordinates, radio frequencies, and vault experiments with no clear connection. The number 111 appears constantly in Fallout 4, not just as your vault number, but in passwords, locations, and terminal entries. The number 76 dominates Fallout 76, obviously, but also appears in other games' background details. And the number 13 ties to the Overseer's original vault from Fallout 1 while popping up in random places across the series. These aren't Easter eggs. They're deliberate patterns Bethesda coded into multiple games without explaining why. 111 appears as your vault number, but also in seemingly random places like radiation levels and terminal IDs. 76 dominates its game, but appears in other titles. And 13 ties to the original vault while appearing elsewhere. But the point is, 111 shows up way more than random chance would suggest. Fallout 76 does the same thing with 76. It's the vault number. It's October 2076 when the bombs drop. Wait, nope, it's 2077. The number appears in graffiti and terminal passwords, in the number of years some characters live. It's like Bethesda put 76 in as many places as possible because they could, but patterns that are deliberate usually mean something in game design, whether these are facility codes, coordinates, or Easter eggs. The consistency across multiple games suggests intentional design rather than random chance. Survivor 2299. In 2013, a website appeared called the Survivor2299.com with a countdown timer and Morse code messages that seemed to tease Fallout 4's announcement. The gaming community went absolutely insane decoding clues, translating coordinates, and building hype for weeks. The site referenced Black Isle, mentioned the Institute, and dropped hints about Boston that turned out to be completely accurate. Then Bethesda confirmed it was a hoax, some fan-made fake that predicted Fallout 4's setting and details so precisely it's still unexplained how they knew. The hoax included specific references to MIT becoming the Institute, mentioned nuclear winter in Massachusetts, and even referenced character names that appeared in the actual game years later. Either the hoaxer had inside information, or they made educated guesses is so accurate it's borderline impossible. When Bethesda shut it down, they never explained who made it or how the predictions were so precise. Some of the Morse code messages remain undecoded, and certain clues on the site reference content that still hasn't appeared in any Fallout game, suggesting either cut content or future storylines. This matters because it shows Fallout's mysteries extend beyond the games themselves. Someone out there knew what Bethesda was planning, or the hoaxer accidentally predicted the future so accurately they created a mystery in real life. Either way, the Survivor 2299 site is proof that even outside the game's universe, Fallout is full of secrets nobody can fully explain. Today I'm breaking down the entire Dunwich mystery so far, from the haunted building in Fallout 3 to the plant monster in Fallout 76. By the end of this video, you'll understand why this might be the darkest conspiracy Bethesda ever wrote. The building. The Dunwich building sits in the southwestern corner of the Capital Wasteland map, literally as far from civilization as you can get without falling off the edge. This is owned by Dunwich Borers LLC, pre-war company that made rock tunneling drills and was run by a guy named Richard Dunwich, who we'll get to later. The locals in Girdershade will warn you about this place, specifically Ronald Laren, who straight up says it's bad mojo and weird things happen there. Smart people would listen. The building has 3 interior sections that get progressively more messed up as you descend. You start in a regular office building entrance, move down to the forsaken Dunwich ruins where reality starts breaking, and finally hit the virulent underchambers, which is basically a nightmare cave system. Along the way, you'll find 9 audio logs from a guy named Jaime who came here looking for his dad, and spoiler alert, it didn't end well. The atmosphere is absolutely oppressive because there's no music, just silence broken by footsteps that aren't yours, and doors that open by themselves. About 60 feral ghouls call this place home now, but they're not the real threat. The real centerpiece is at the very bottom in the cave system, a massive stone obelisk covered in vines and human skulls, with what looks like a woman's figure reaching out from the stone itself. This thing pumps out 20 rads per second, enough to kill you if you stand too close without protection. Activating it just tells you that being near it makes you uneasy, which is the understatement of the century. What's wild is, this obelisk has been here since before the war, and it's connected to everything else we're about to talk about. That obelisk you found has actually been there for thousands of years. The real question isn't what happened in this building, it's who built that altar, and why did a pre-war mining company know exactly where to dig? The answer involves a cursed book that literally explodes when you try to destroy it, and trust me, you're not ready for what that implies. But the mystery is far from over, and it only gets more crazy from here. Like the part of the mystery hidden within a DLC, Point Lookout. The Point Lookout DLC introduces the Kriv Bekni, which is basically Fallout's version of the Necronomicon, and trust me, that's not an exaggeration. This large brown book, bound in odd black leather with strange glyphs stamped on it and a bloody gash across the front, is the most cursed object in the entire Fallout universe. It was owned by a woman named Constance Blackhall, who styled herself as a priestess of an obscure cult, and used the book to lead the swamp folk in dark rituals both before and after the Great War. Here's where it gets wild. Constance lived an unnaturally long life, like generations longer than she should have. And according to legend, when the book was stolen from her, she immediately died a death that should have found her generations before. Think about what that means for a second. This book doesn't just grant knowledge. It's keeping someone's body alive against the laws of nature. The moment it leaves her possession, she ages 200 years in an instant. What kind of entity has that kind of power? And more importantly, if the book can do that to someone who worships it, what does it do to people who try to destroy it? Keep that question in your head, because when we get to the ritual site, the answer is going to make you question everything about Fallout's lore. You find this book at the ritual site, an underground cavern where swamp folk still perform twisted ceremonies they don't even understand anymore. The book sits in a bowl of blood on a stone altar, surrounded by the mutilated corpse of someone who was kept alive with stimpaks as long as possible during their torture. This triggers the quest The Dark Heart of Blackhall, where you meet Obadiah Blackhall, Constance's great-great-great-grandson who's stuck in a wheelchair and wants the book back to restore his family's power over the swamp folk. There's also a Christian missionary named Marcella who knows the book is evil and wants you to destroy it, but she gets murdered by Obadiah's hired smugglers before she can finish her mission. You've got 2 choices here. Return the book to Obadiah for 1,000 caps and 100 XP, or take it all the way back to the Dunwich Building's obelisk and press it against the stone. If you choose option 2, the book bursts into flames along with every ghoul nearby. You get 500 karma points, and you get to feel like you just saved the world from an eldritch eldritch horror. If you give it to Obadiah instead, you can find him in his basement praying at an altar with a beheaded swamp folk corpse, saying Ugg-Qualtoth is returned, be afraid, worms. The fact that this quest starts in Point Lookout but can only be completed back in the Capital Wasteland shows how connected these locations really are. Chimy's father, the ranger we'll talk about later, had this same book when he came to the Dunwich building, which means the Criv Macnee has been traveling between these cursed sites for years. Point Lookout expands the mystery from a single haunted building to a conspiracy spanning Maryland and DC, but wait until you see what Fallout 4 adds. Dunwich Borers. Fast forward to Fallout 4 and the Commonwealth, and you'll find Dunwich Borers, a marble quarry in the northeast that makes the building from Fallout 3 look like a guided tour. This place was operated by the same Dunwich Borers LLC company, and on the surface it looks like any other raider-infested location with about 12 raiders, some turrets, and a guy in power armor. The real horror is underground, where the company was secretly excavating something way more valuable than marble. The interior is divided into stations 1 through 4, each managed by project managers who got regular safety memos about how railings cost too much money to replace and maybe just don't fall to your death. The terminal entries are darkly hilarious in the most messed up way, mentioning the 4th incident of the month where someone lost an eye, a worker named Jerry who fell to his death at happy hour where alcohol costs were taken from paychecks, and a kid who fell near the quarry ledge at the annual picnic. The company treated human lives like expenses they couldn't afford, and spoiler alert, it was all intentional. A project manager named Tim Schutz left a holotape explaining that management brought in new equipment and a stand-in crew for a secret excavation, and he was worried the other managers would figure out the marble quarrying was just a cover story. Management responded by inviting all 4 project managers to Station 4 under false pretenses, where they became human sacrifices. As you descend deeper, you start experiencing flashbacks triggered by opening certain doors. The first one is brief, showing pre-war employees in clean clothes working like it's just another day at the office. The second flashback is way more disturbing. You see 9 people kneeling with their hands behind their backs and heads bowed while a man in pastor's vestments stands at a pulpit making slicing motions with a large knife as the entire room shakes violently. Candles line the chamber and long chains hang from the ceiling, setting up what's clearly a mass sacrifice. When the vision ends, you're back in the present with feral ghouls everywhere, including 4 named ghouls, who are the project managers, Bob Stanson, John Hatfield, Bradley Ramone, and Tim Schutz himself. Turns out management betrayed everyone. But here's where this gets absolutely insane. Remember how I said Richard Dunwich deliberately chose these locations? The flashback you just witnessed wasn't a random cult gathering. It was timed. October 23rd, 2077, the exact day the bombs fell, at the exact moment the world ended, this ritual was happening. That's not a coincidence. Someone knew the nukes were coming and decided that was the perfect time to complete a sacrifice. Why? Because when we get underwater, you're gonna see exactly what they were trying to wake up. The absolute worst part is at the bottom past Station 4, where you'll find a large radioactive pool. You have to dive down into highly irradiated water wearing a radiation suit or popping Rad-X like candy, swim through an underwater tunnel, and you'll see a massive cyclopean statue face buried in the earth with one giant pupilless eye staring up at you through the murky water. Following a side passage leads you to an altar chamber lit by glowing fungus where you'll find what you came for. Dunwich Borers proves the conspiracy wasn't isolated to DC. It was a coordinated effort across multiple states to unearth ancient temples. Now, let's talk about the weapon you find down there. Now, here's the part that should terrify you. That giant stone face buried in the radioactive pool, its eyes are open, not carved open, actually open like it's watching you through the water. And according to the lore, this statue has been here since before humans existed in North America. So when Richard Dunwich's company was digging for marble, they weren't discovering this temple by accident. They knew it was here. The question is, how? And the answer ties directly to that book we found in Point Lookout, Kremviate's Tooth. Sitting on the underwater altar flanked by 2 mini nukes and glowing mushrooms is Kremvia's Tooth, a unique machete that's one of the most disturbing weapons in Fallout 4. This curved, jagged blade looks like a monstrous fang, and it's described as a religious artifact from before the Great War with strong occult ties to Ugg-Qualtoth. It served as the sacrificial knife for those dark rituals you saw in the flashbacks, which explains why it's got such nasty effects. The base damage is around 31, which is standard for a machete, but here's where it gets interesting. Kremvia's Tooth has a unique sacrificial blade modification that causes 3 points of poison damage per second for 10 seconds and 5 points of bleed damage per second for 5 seconds. That's 30 total poison damage and 25 total bleed damage on top of the regular hits. The bleed effect stacks with multiple hits and nothing in the game resists it, not even robots. While the poison doesn't stack, but still wrecks organic enemies. What makes this weapon truly special is you can remove the sacrificial blade mod at a weapons workbench and attach it to any other machete including legendary ones, the fact that this blade has supernatural properties in a game that's supposed to be science fiction is wild. The bleed and poison aren't explained by any in-game science, they're just accepted as mystical effects from an ancient artifact. Players have nicknamed it one of the best melee weapons in the game because of that stackable bleed damage that shreds everything from Deathclaws to super mutants. The game marks it as a legendary weapon in your Pip-Boy with a star, treating it the same as any other unique find. But the lore weight behind it is way heavier than a regular legendary drop. Here's what the game doesn't tell you directly. This knife has been used for ritual sacrifices for potentially thousands of years. The poison and bleed effects, those aren't game mechanics, they're the accumulated spiritual corruption from centuries of human offerings. Every person who died on this altar left a mark on the blade, and now you're carrying that with you. But the real question is, what were they sacrificing people to? The answer has a name, and it's been waiting underground for a very long time. Kremva's tooth is proof that whatever Ugg-Qualtoth is, it has real tangible power that survived the nuclear apocalypse. Speaking of which, let's talk about the entity itself, Ugg-Qualtoth. So who or what is Ugg-Qualtoth? The game describes it as an alien entity, an eldritch being, and a forgotten god, which basically means it's Fallout's version of Lovecraft's Great Old Ones. According to the Fallout role-playing game, though those who worship it suggest it may not be so forgotten after all. The Fallout 3 official game guide includes a quote that's directly lifted from the Dunwich Horror. Ugg-Qualtoth knows the gate, Ugg-Qualtoth is the gate, Ugg-Qualtoth is the key and guardian of the gate, which in Lovecraft's original story is said about Yog-Sothoth. The entity has physical manifestations scattered across the East Coast. The obelisk in the Dunwich building with the woman reaching out of the stone and 20 rads per second. The giant buried statue at Dunwich Borers with its cyclopean eye staring through the water, and has power. People who get too close to these altars experience hallucinations, hear whispers of names like Alhazred and Gaieth, and slowly lose their minds. The audio logs and terminal entries show a clear progression from curious explorer to obsessed cultist to ghoulified worshipper. Terminal entries from Herman Granger dated March through May of 2134 document his transformation. He starts panicking about strange sounds. Then by April 27th, he's writing my skin, barely any left. One of them now. And then comes the famous line, one of us, Ugg-Qualtoth, is returned. By May 1st, it's just unintelligible rambling about deep temples and screaming and retribution. Chimey's ninth and final audio log after he's ghoulified has him saying a sharp knife to send him to deep temple. Abdul comes again on the Feast of the Weaker. Alhazred Gaieth Gieth. Abdul refers to Abdul Alhazred, the fictional author of the Necronomicon in Lovecraft's work, and Gaieth is a homage to Arlaia, where Cthulhu waits dreaming. What makes Ugg-Qualtoth genuinely terrifying is it doesn't need to physically manifest to have power. Its mere presence drives people insane. Its altars radiate lethal energy, and its influence spans centuries from pre-war to post-war. The guide states only the screaming sound of Ugg-Qualtoth can wield the power of the obelisk, suggesting the entity has some form of voice or presence that can be heard by those sensitive to it. Multiple characters across 3 games all experience the same phenomena when approaching these sites, which means this isn't radiation-induced hallucination, it's something real and active. But here's what should keep you up at night. Ugg-Qualtoth isn't dead, it's not sleeping. It's actively influencing people 200 years after nuclear war sterilized the planet. That means radiation, nuclear winter, complete societal collapse, none of it mattered. Which brings us to the people who knowingly served it. Ugg-Qualtoth represents cosmic horror in its purest form, an ancient force that existed before humanity and will exist long after. But who brought it to our attention? The family. Richard Dunwich and Constance Blackhall were siblings who shared an obsession with the occult that would make any horror movie antagonist jealous. Richard founded Dunwich Borers LLC in Washington, D.C., a company that manufactured rock tunneling drills and acoustic borers for the excavation industry. On paper, he was a successful mining baron, but the truth was way darker. Richard deliberately chose locations for his operations, hoping to unearth mysterious artifacts in ancient temples. And he used compliant foremen and generous benefits to keep workers from discovering the true purpose. The abysmal safety record at every Dunwich site wasn't negligence, it was sacrifice, a modern form of human offering intended to bring eldritch attention and supernatural powers to corporate leadership. Constance became a widow in 2058 when the new plague took her husband, and she turned her wealth into a means of acquiring archaic texts and artifacts. Her most notorious acquisition was the Krivbekni, which she used to style herself as a priestess and draw a small circle of devotees. She led the swamp folk in rituals both before and and after the Great War, and the book granted her an unnaturally long life, spanning multiple generations, even in the radiation-soaked marshes of Point Lookout. The conspiracy between Richard and Constance was coordinated across state lines. Richard positioned the Dunwich Building to unearth the obelisk beneath it, and chose the Massachusetts quarry location to uncover the ancient temple. Cut dialogue from Point Lookout that didn't make it into the final game would have had Obadiah explain that Constance had a brother, Richard Dunwich, who was a wealthy businessman with a company building up north, and his obsession with the occult was as great as her own. By October 2077, Richard's excavations at Dunwich Borers had reached their goal. Tim Schutz sent management a holotape saying the crew at Station 4 still thought they were setting up a new station, and asking what to do about the other project managers who might figure things out. Then the bombs fell on October 23rd, and those 4 managers became the feral ghouls you fight 210 years later. Richard's fate is unknown, but given that the Dunwich Building was operational on October 18th with staff still working, he was likely present when the war started and probably met the same fate as everyone else in the capital wasteland. Think about the timeline here. Richard positions operations in DC and Massachusetts. Constance sets up in Maryland. Both locations happen to be sitting on ancient temples dedicated to the same entity. The statistical odds of that being coincidence? 0, which means either they had maps showing where these temples were, or something was guiding them. And when you realize that Dunwich Borers LLC had contracts with major corporations, including Poseidon Energy, you start to wonder how deep this actually went. Was this just 2 siblings with occult obsessions, or was there a pre-war conspiracy at the highest levels of American industry? Because when we jump to Fallout 76, you're going to see evidence that it was bigger than anyone thought. The Dunwich family conspiracy shows that the Fallout universe had legitimate evil beyond nuclear war and radiation. Now let's jump forward to see how this continues in Fallout 76. Lucky Hole. Fallout 76 takes the mystery to West Virginia with Lucky Hole Mine, a location in the Savage Divide region that was originally a lead mine. An old woman, later revealed to possibly be the first priestess of the wood, requested tours around March 2061, but was turned away by security. Shortly after, the mine was ordered to cease operations by its parent corporation, and when the woman returned with a group, security eventually surrendered the decommissioned mine out of fear. Fast forward to October 21st, 2077, 2 days before the bombs dropped, and the Cult of the Mothman held a sermon announcing a ceremony in Point Pleasant. Brother Charles received a vision from the wise Mothman warning that fire and flood would destroy the town within a day. So, a group fled to Lucky Hole Mine and survived the Great War inside. While waiting for the fallout to clear, the cult split into 2 factions. The followers of the Winged One turned to darker worship of something called the Interloper, or Firstborn of the Wood, and they remained in Lucky Hole Mine building altars and totems. The Enlightened, led by Brother Charles, rejected this darker path and eventually founded a church called the Lantern outside West Virginia. The followers became hostile enemies who attack on sight, wearing pastors' vestments and gas masks, wielding cultist blades and fire axes. The mine interior is massive, with extensive tunnels full of lead ore and crystal ore, security doors requiring codes found in notes outside, a hidden chem lab through vines, and a chapel area with a coffin altar containing the deceased first priestess. There's an underground spring with cyclopean statue faces partially buried in the water, the same Art Deco sculptures found at Dunwich Borers, and past more hidden passages obscured by foliage you'll find the Interloper's lair. This foggy chamber is littered with bones, jars, skeletons, corpses, and loose weapons, with 5 large Art Deco faces watching over everything. In the center is the Interloper itself, a large, dormant, plant-like creature with humanoid features, skin resembling stripped bark, a tangle of branches forming its biomass, and several hand-like appendages. It bleeds when struck, and occasionally stirs listlessly, and a sickle rests on the ground nearby. Let me be clear about what you're looking at. This is the first time in Fallout history where you can actually see one of these entities in physical form, not as a statue, not as a vision, but as a living, breathing creature. And it's dormant. Not dead, dormant. The cultists are still worshipping it, still bringing offerings, still waiting for it to wake up. Now remember that Richard and Constance were performing rituals on October 23rd, the day the bombs fell. Remember that the quarry sacrifice happened at the exact moment of the nuclear holocaust. What if all of that, the entire conspiracy, the human sacrifices, the excavations, what if it was all building toward waking this thing up? And what if the nuclear war interrupted the ritual before they could finish? A Mothman Museum employee named Jeff Lane recorded holotapes about hearing tales of an entity made real deep in the earth. He claimed the Interloper called to him in visions more real than the senses and chose him as conduit of the unknowable. His body is likely among those found in the lair. The critical question is whether the Interloper is Ugg-Qualtoth itself, a different entity, or a member of the same cosmic pantheon. The evidence suggests connection through the shared Art Deco sculpture sculptures, similar worship patterns involving blood sacrifice and madness, and the presence of obelisks and altars. But the game never explicitly confirms the identity. What is confirmed is that Bethesda acknowledged fan theories by adding a note in the Atlantic City expansion addressed to R. Dunwich and C. Blackhall, the first time Richard Dunwich is directly mentioned in Fallout 76. Fallout 76 expands the mystery by showing organized pre-war cult activity, living hostile cultists instead of just dead ones, and the first actual physical form of a Lovecraftian entity that players can see. Time to tie it all together with inspiration. Lovecraft Connection. Everything about the Dunwich mystery is a love letter to H.P. Lovecraft, specifically his novella The Dunwich Horror. The name Dunwich is a direct reference to the story about a village terrorized by the offspring of an eldritch being. Bug Qualtoth is a play on Yog-Sothoth, and the game guide's quote about gates and guardians is pulled almost word for word from Lovecraft's original text. The Crivbecni is the Necronomicon. The lead designer Joel Burgess straight up confirmed it, saying the Crivbecni is the Necronomicon basically, and admitted the name was a nonsense word he meant to replace, but it made the final version. The Whispers of Alhazred refer to Abdul Alhazred, the mad Arab who wrote the Necronomicon in Lovecraft lore, and Gieth is a nod to Ar-Ulia. The Blackhall and Dunwich families parallel Lovecraft's ancient shunned families with dark ties, similar to the Whately family from the Dunwich Horror or the degenerate residents of Innsmouth. The structure of descending into the Dunwich building and discovering the obelisk mirrors, the rats in the walls, where the protagonist discovers horrifying ancestral secrets. The buried statue at Dunwich Borers echoes the shunned house where digging under a haunted building reveals the elbow of a massive buried entity. Even the swamp folk of Point Lookout parallel the fish hybrid residents of Innsmouth with their deformities and degenerate cult practices. The Lovecraftian themes hit every note of cosmic horror. Unknowable ancient entities that predate humanity. Forbidden knowledge that drives people insane. Multi-generational cults perform rituals they no longer understand. Cursed grimoires that grant power at terrible cost. Isolated locations hiding buried secrets. Human insignificance in the face of cosmic forces. Cyclopean architecture suggesting non-human builders. Dreams and visions serve as communication from beyond. The entire mystery embodies the core Lovecraft concept that there are things older and more powerful than humanity, and learning about them leads only to madness and death. What's brilliant is how Bethesda adapted these themes into Fallout without breaking the science fiction framework. The entity is described as alien rather than supernatural, leaving room for interpretation. It could be an ancient extraterrestrial, a psychic phenomenon, pre-war occult science gone wrong, or genuine supernatural horror. The game never definitively answers this, maintaining the ambiguity that's central to Lovecraft's work. Joel Burgess said in an interview that the Lovecraft stuff is definitely inspiration, but it's not a direct reference. They were thinking about Innsmouth and all that while creating something new. The Lovecraftian integration works because it's all optional content in remote locations away from main storylines. Players focused on the core narrative might never encounter it, but those who explore will find this parallel mythology running alongside the post-apocalyptic setting. It adds existential dread beyond the nuclear devastation, suggesting that even in a world destroyed by human hubris, there are older, greater threats that view our entire civilization as insignificant. The Dunwich mystery proves Fallout has room for cosmic horror and retro-futuristic science fiction to coexist, and both are scarier for it. The pint-sized slasher. The pint-sized slasher began as an urban legend that parents in the Washington, D.C. area told to frighten misbehaving children, a boogeyman who would emerge from a dog kennel at dusk to chase kids with a toy knife. The legend captured the public imagination so completely that it became the second best-selling Halloween costume in pre-war America, only outsold by the heroic Captain Cosmos. But in 2052, this tale took a horrifying turn into reality with the infamous Linden Street slayings, which became a top story. Wearing a sinister clown mask, black and white striped shirt, and wielding an oversized chef's or butcher's knife. The only known survivor, a boy named Christopher Atkinson, witnessed the brutal murder of his brother Sean, and his eyewitness account, quoted by Police Chief Joseph Field, confirmed the killer was a male child, cementing the pint-sized aspect. The original slasher's identity was never discovered, and his fate was presumably sealed by nuclear annihilation. But his legend endured in ways that prove how deeply this horror had embedded itself in American culture. In Fallout 3, players can actually embody the killer within the Tranquility Lane alien virtual reality simulation in Vault 112, where the sadistic Dr. Stanislaus Braun tasks the lone wanderer with terrorizing and murdering simulated residents while disguised as the slasher. This interactive sequence forces players to participate in the violent dismantling of the pre-war facade, turning a happy, peaceful neighborhood into a slaughterhouse. Physical evidence of the slasher's activities, or those of a copycat, appears in Point Lookout, where his iconic mask is discovered in a gruesome, blood-soaked motel room, suggesting his murderous legacy continued far from DC. The legend resurfaces again in Fallout 4 through the Creation Club quest A Pint-Sized Problem, introducing a post-war ghoul who, broken by the loss of his family, has become obsessed with the slasher myth and taken up the mantle himself. A note found on his body reveals his motivation. "No more will things be taken from me, I will do the taking now." But while the pint-sized slasher was a corruption of childhood innocence, the next killer turned art itself into an instrument of philosophical terror. The Fens Phantom. Operating in pre-war Boston, the Fens Phantom was a killer with a deeply philosophical bent who established his lair and gallery in the Fens Street sewer because he felt it was insulated from what he perceived as the hypocrisy of the world above. Through a series of 4 holotapes addressed directly to the detective hunting him, he reveals his disturbing motivations and worldview. He describes life on the surface as exhausting, a place where one must smile at people who don't care about you one way or another, and explains that it was only in the sewer, surrounded by his macabre creations, that he felt he could truly live. Phantom is believed to have murdered at least 24 people, and he didn't simply dispose of the bodies. He arranged their skeletal remains into grotesque, artistic tableaus throughout the sewer system. Each of these displays is marked with chalk X's on nearby walls, which likely denote the number of victims used in each specific art piece. This systematic documentation shows a methodical mind that viewed murder not as random violence but as creative expression requiring careful cataloging and presentation. Over time, the Phantom developed a deep, almost romantic obsession with the unnamed detective on his trail, viewing him as a kindred spirit and the only person capable of truly understanding his work. He eventually contacted the detective directly, luring him into the sewer for what he clearly intended as a final, intimate confrontation. The 4th and final holotape implies the Phantom was victorious in this encounter, stating with obvious satisfaction, "It doesn't matter anymore. Now you're here with me and we have all the time in the world to get to know each other." The ultimate fate of both the killer and his pursuer has become a subject of intense fan debate and speculation. One theory suggests a murder-suicide. A more popular theory posits that the Phantom actually survived the Great War in his sewer, with the ambient radiation slowly transforming him into the powerful glowing one that players must fight at the end of the location. A particularly intriguing extension of this lore connects the unnamed detective to Nick Valentine, whose memories were scanned by the Institute before he descended into the sewer for his final encounter with the Phantom. The Fens Phantom serves as a clear thematic precursor to the post-war killer Pickman, as both arrange their victims into artistic displays. If you thought artistic murder was disturbing, the next killer used corporate branding as his signature in ways that proved prophetic. The Nuka Killer. This pre-war serial killer operated in the Boston area and is known only through fragmented police terminal entries discovered by players 200 years later, making the investigation a cold case spanning centuries of nuclear winter. The investigation was a multi-jurisdictional effort involving Sheriff Taylor of the Nahant Sheriff's Department and Federal Officer A, showing how seriously law enforcement took this particular threat. Calling card earned him his distinctive name. He placed 2 Nuka-Cola bottle caps into the eye sockets of his victims after what appears to have been drowning them. All 3 of his known victims, a man named Gonzalez, another named Yavitz, were found in water-damaged clothing near large bodies of water. Disparate evidence is scattered across terminals at the Nahant Sheriff's Department, the East Boston Police Station, and the Coast Guard Pier, requiring players to piece together the full picture from multiple locations. Nuka-Cola was the most dominant brand in pre-war America. The killer co-opted this ubiquitous symbol of refreshment and turned it into a token of death, placing the caps where eyes should be as if to suggest his victims had been blinded by corporate propaganda. Like the other pre-war killers, the Nuka Killer's identity and ultimate fate were lost in the atomic fire of the Great War, existing only as a ghost in the machine, but his legacy lives on every time a Wastelander trades bottle caps for supplies, unknowingly participating in an economy founded on the same symbol a serial killer once used to mark death. While these pre-war killers revealed the rot beneath America's facade, the post-war world didn't create entirely new forms of evil. It just gave existing psychopathy new targets and justifications. specifications. Pickman, found in Boston's North End, this well-spoken and unnervingly polite man operates out of what he calls his gallery, and his entire character serves as a direct homage to H.P. Lovecraft's 1927 short story, Pickman's Model, which tells of a Boston artist whose horrifyingly realistic paintings of monsters are revealed to be drawn from life. Fallout 4's Pickman brings this concept into the post-apocalypse, with the Wasteland's raiders serving as his monstrous muses in ways that create profound moral ambiguity. He lures them into the tunnels beneath his gallery, where he tortures and kills them through methods that are clearly both prolonged and creative. He then uses their blood as paint and their dismembered bodies as components for grotesque sculptures that fill his gallery, creating art that is simultaneously horrifying and, given his choice of subjects, arguably serving a public service. To acquire new materials for his work, Pickman leaves calling cards on raider corpses he kills in the wild, notes taunting their comrades to come find him if they want revenge, each marked with a heart drawn in the victim's blood. This shows he's not content to wait passively for subjects, but actively hunts raiders throughout the Commonwealth, making him perhaps the most effective anti-raider force in the region. Players can discover the gallery after finding one of these cards during their travels, or can be directed to investigate by Hancock, the ghoul mayor of Goodneighbor, who has heard disturbing rumors. Upon arrival, players find the gallery under siege by a raider gang led by a particularly angry raider named Slab, who is seeking bloody revenge for his fallen men. Players must fight through these raiders to reach Pickman, who they find cornered in the tunnels below his gallery. Here, the game presents one of its most morally complex choices: kill Pickman as a dangerous psychopath, or save him from the raiders seeking his death. If players choose to save him, Pickman is genuinely grateful and provides them with a key to his personal safe, which contains the unique combat knife, Pickman's Blade, a weapon that seems to carry some of his artistic obsession with it. This creates a disquieting parallel with the player character, who almost certainly has a much higher raider body count than Pickman does. The encounter forces a moment of uncomfortable introspection. Pickman serves as a dark mirror, reflecting what the player character could become if they allowed the violence of the wasteland to consume their humanity entirely. But if you thought targeting raiders made killing morally ambiguous, the next killer chose victims completely at random for pure entertainment. Dixie. This high-ranking lieutenant in the Disciples represents not just individual psychopathy, but the absolute endpoint of an entire raider philosophy taken to its logical extreme. The Disciples are the most vicious and sadistic of the three raider gangs controlling the Nuka World theme park, and unlike the profit-driven operators or the Alpha Mentality Pack, the Disciples kill simply for the pleasure of it, embracing nihilistic violence as a lifestyle and art form. Terminal entries from other gang leaders reveal that the Disciples' leader, Nisha, promoted Dixie not out of merit or respect, but out of genuine fear. Nisha hoped that giving Dixie a position of authority and responsibility would keep her extreme psychopathy somewhat in check, but this strategy appears to have backfired spectacularly. Dixie's promotion only gave her more resources and opportunities to indulge her murderous compulsions on a larger scale. Dixie's primary weapon isn't her gun or knife, but deception wrapped in Southern charm. She carefully affects the persona of a polite Southern belle, using a sweet, honeyed accent and charming manners to lure unsuspecting victims into a false sense of security. This facade is so convincing that victims often remain hopeful even as she leads them to their deaths, believing until the very end that they might survive the encounter through negotiation or appeal to her better nature. Her personal quarters in Fizztop Mountain serve as a testament to her true nature and provide crucial insight into her psychology. The rooms are decorated with mutilated corpses arranged in artistic displays, but more disturbing is her collection of souvenir holotapes. These audio recordings capture the exact moments of her kills, specifically focusing on the psychological transition when she drops her charming mask and reveals her true intentions to victims. The tapes preserve their hope, turning to confusion, then terror, then desperate pleading, and finally silence. These souvenir recordings are crucial to understanding Dixie's psychology because they reveal she derives pleasure not just from the physical act of killing, but from the emotional torture and the complete shattering of her victim's hope. She feeds on the moment of realization when people understand they've been completely deceived and that their death is inevitable. The fact that she keeps and presumably replays these recordings suggests she relives these moments repeatedly, extracting ongoing satisfaction from each victim's despair. Players can encounter Dixie in several ways throughout the Nuka World questline. She may appear during random encounters in the wasteland, casually asking players to help her decide which of her bound captives to kill first, treating murder as a casual entertainment choice like selecting a movie. Her tone during these encounters is consistently cheerful and conversational, casual, as if discussing the weather rather than premeditated murder. Her ultimate fate depends entirely on player choices during the Nuka World storyline. She can remain a valuable ally if players choose to side with the Disciples and embrace their philosophy of violence for its own sake. Alternatively, she can be killed if players eventually turn against the raider gangs, or decide her methods are too extreme, even for their criminal enterprise. If players do choose to kill her, her final word is reportedly a soft, contented "finally," suggesting that death represents not defeat, but simply another new sensation for her to experience. This reaction implies she views her own death not as tragedy, but as the natural conclusion to a life dedicated to exploring different forms of violence and suffering, including her own. Dixie represents what humanity can become when all moral and societal constraints have been absent for multiple generations, and cruelty is embraced not as a tool for survival, but as a fulfilling lifestyle choice. She's not a product of desperation or addiction like many raiders, but someone who has made evil into an art form and a source of personal fulfillment. While Dixie's madness was clearly a product of post-war chaos, the next killer's story remains shrouded in Appalachian mystery. The Sickleman. This enigmatic figure represents something unique in Fallout's approach to serial killer lore, a mystery that exists primarily through environmental storytelling and community investigation rather than direct narrative exposition. The Sickleman's story is told through a collaborative effort between game developers and players, creating an ongoing investigation that spans years of real-time speculation and theory building. Primary evidence of his existence is an unmarked cabin located near Vault 76 in Appalachia. Underneath the porch, players can discover a hidden crawl space that contains graffiti scrawled on the wall reading "Sickleman was here," accompanied by 4 headless skeletons and a rusted sickle. The scene is clearly meant to be discovered, arranged like a calling card or signature left by someone who wants their work to be found and recognized. His modus operandi appears to be decapitation using the sickle, and he leaves his victims' heads behind while taking the bodies for unknown purposes. This selective trophy taking suggests a specific psychological compulsion or ritual significance that goes beyond simple murder. The fact that he leaves the heads while taking the bodies implies the heads serve as his signature or message, while the bodies may serve some other purpose in his ritual or disposal method. The Sickleman's identity has become one of Appalachia's most hotly debated mysteries among players and lore enthusiasts. 2 prominent theories have emerged, both connecting him to the mysterious Mothman cult, a connection supported by several pieces of environmental evidence. His lair overlooks Landview Lighthouse, which serves as a key ritual site for Mothman cultists, and the headless skulls he leaves behind bear similarities to the skull totems used in cultist ceremonies. The first theory identifies the Sickleman as Wesley Addington, a wealthy pre-war big game hunter whose story is told through holotapes found at his hunting lodge. In these recordings, Addington expresses growing boredom with hunting animals and a disturbing desire to begin hunting people instead, viewing human prey as the ultimate challenge for his hunting skills. Proponents of this theory argue that his distinct aristocratic accent matches that of a high-ranking Mothman cult leader heard on other holotapes throughout Appalachia. The second, more elaborate theory suggests the Sickleman is actually Wise Charles, a pre-war cultist who somehow survived the nuclear apocalypse and continues his murderous activities in the post-war world. This theory is supported by the proximity of his lair to other confirmed cult sites, and the consistent theme of decapitation that appears in various cult-related locations. Most compellingly, the Wastelanders update made a subtle but significant change to the graffiti, altering it from "Sickleman was here" to "Sickleman is here," implying the killer is still active rather than being a historical figure. Furthermore, during the seasonal Mothman Equinox event, observant players have noticed that a sickle appears on the table next to Wise Charles during cult gatherings, an item that is not present at other times. This detail suggests an ongoing connection between the character and the weapon associated with the murders. The Sickleman represents a fascinating evolution in Fallout's narrative design because, as a character in a live service game, his story has been subtly altered and expanded through game updates over time. This transforms players from simple discoverers of static lore into active participants in an ongoing cold case investigation. The community-driven effort to solve his mystery encourages continuous engagement with the game world and creates a sense that the mystery lives and breathes alongside the evolving game environment. This approach also reflects the reality of how serial killer investigations work in the real world. They're often collaborative efforts involving multiple investigators over extended periods, with new evidence and theories emerging over time. Lorenzo Cabot. Lorenzo Cabot represents perhaps the most complex and morally ambiguous figure in the entire Fallout universe, a character who transcends the typical definition of a serial killer to embody genuine Lovecraftian horror. Born in 1835, Lorenzo was a brilliant archaeologist whose life took a catastrophic turn in 1894, when he discovered a lost alien city buried deep in the Arabian desert. There, he unearthed a strange, crown-like artifact that would fundamentally alter not just his life, but his very nature. The artifact fused permanently to his skull, granting him incredible and unnatural powers, true immortality, enhanced physical strength, and resilience that borders on the supernatural, and potent telekinetic abilities that allow him to kill with a thought. However, these gifts came with a terrible price. The alien influence gradually warped his mind, making him increasingly paranoid, violent, and utterly sociopathic. Lorenzo, who emerged from the desert, was no longer entirely human, but something far more dangerous. By 1898, recognizing the growing threat his father represented to both his family and society at large, Jack Cabot made the difficult decision to have Lorenzo committed to a specially constructed cell in the basement of Parsons State Insane Asylum. For the next 400 years, Lorenzo remained imprisoned in this cell, effectively serving as both a prisoner and a living battery for his family's continued existence. Jack discovered that his father's unique alien-altered physiology could be exploited to create a remarkable serum from Lorenzo's blood. This serum halted the aging process entirely, allowing Jack, his mother, and his sister to achieve practical immortality. For 4 centuries, the Cabot family used Lorenzo's suffering to fuel their unnaturally long lives, making them parasites who sustained themselves on their patriarch's imprisonment and pain. Players become entangled in the Cabot family's dark affairs when hired by Jack to investigate mysterious activities at the asylum. This leads to a crisis when mercenaries launch a raid attempting to free Lorenzo, forcing players to confront the reality of the family's situation and the nature of their prisoner. The climax of the questline, The Secret of Cabot House, places players directly before Lorenzo's cell and forces them to make one of the most consequential moral decisions in the entire game. Honor Jack's desperate request to kill his father and end the threat forever, or side with Lorenzo and set him free from his centuries of imprisonment. If players choose to kill Lorenzo, they eliminate his threat permanently, but also doom the Cabot family to begin aging and eventually dying naturally after centuries of artificial life extension. Jack rewards this choice with 500 caps and Lorenzo's artifact gun, a unique gamma gun that has been modified with the Alien Crown's telekinetic technology, creating a weapon that literally harnesses otherworldly power. If players choose to free Lorenzo, his first act upon release is exactly what Jack warned it would be. He seeks immediate and brutal vengeance against the family that imprisoned him. Lorenzo travels directly to Cabot House and systematically murders his entire family using his telekinetic powers, crushing them to death or throwing them against walls with the force of his mind. As a reward for this liberation, he provides players with a lifetime supply of his mysterious serum, an exceptionally powerful consumable that grants significant combat bonuses and represents a share in his alien-enhanced physiology. But Lorenzo's story doesn't end with his family's death. If freed, he can be encountered randomly throughout the Commonwealth in scenarios that confirm Jack's warnings about his sociopathic nature. Players may find him standing over the fresh corpses of innocent ghoul settlers, calmly explaining that he killed them to study their radiation syndrome, which he finds has a striking similarity to my own condition. These encounters serve as chilling reminders that the player has become directly complicit in the murders that follow Lorenzo's release. Lorenzo's random appearances also raise disturbing questions about his ultimate goals. His interest in studying radiation's effects on humans suggests he may be conducting his own experiments, possibly attempting to understand how his alien-altered condition relates to the mutations caused by nuclear radiation. This implies he views post-war humanity not as people deserving protection, but as test subjects for his ongoing research into the nature of his own condition. The moral complexity of the Lorenzo situation extends far beyond a simple choice between good and evil. The Cabot family's actions are deeply immoral. They have essentially enslaved their patriarch and used his suffering to sustain their own lives for centuries. They are parasites in the most literal sense, drawing life from someone else's pain. Siding with Jack means upholding and perpetuating this fundamentally corrupt arrangement. However, Lorenzo represents an even more immediate and undeniable evil. His alien-influenced mind no longer recognizes human life as having inherent value, and his immortal nature means he will continue killing forever unless stopped. The choice forces players to decide between supporting a corrupt but stable situation or unleashing an ancient evil to punish a different, more personal form of evil. The subsequent random encounters serve as stark, bloody reminders that moral choices in the Fallout universe have real consequences that extend far beyond the immediate moment of decision. Every ghoul settlement Lorenzo destroys, every innocent person he kills in his research, represents the price of the player's choice to free him. The game doesn't allow players to make this decision and then forget about it. It forces them to confront the ongoing consequences of their moral choices. Lorenzo Lorenzo Cabot ultimately represents the point where Fallout's serial killer lore transcends human psychology entirely and enters the realm of cosmic horror. His actions aren't driven by trauma, desperation, or even human sadism, but by an alien intelligence that fundamentally doesn't understand or value human life. He embodies the terrifying possibility that some forms of evil are so alien and incomprehensible that they can't be reasoned with, reformed, or contained, only destroyed or unleashed. These 7 figures, the pint-sized slasher, Fenn's Phantom, Nuka Killer, Pickman, Dixie, Sickleman, and Lorenzo Cabot, top USSA, represent the full spectrum of serial killer psychology in the Fallout universe. From childhood corruption to alien-influenced cosmic horror, they serve as crucial narrative elements that add layers of intimate, psychological terror to the grand-scale devastation of nuclear apocalypse. The pre-war killers, the Slasher, Phantom, and Nuka Killer, reveal that the rot was always present beneath America's idyllic facade, proving that the darkness wasn't created by the bombs, but simply given new opportunities to flourish. Their stories, discovered like time capsules buried in computer terminals and holotapes, demonstrate that the supposed golden age of pre-war America was already plagued by profound psychological sickness. The post-war killers, Pickman, Dixie, and the Sickleman, represent how this darkness evolved and adapted to the lawless reality of the wasteland. They're not rebelling against a structured society because no such society exists anymore. Instead, they're natural extensions of a world defined by violence, channeling their compulsions toward raiders, innocent travelers, or mysterious ritual purposes that may connect to larger supernatural forces. Lorenzo Cabot stands alone as a bridge between worlds, his ancient, alien-induced madness, making the brutality of both the old world and the new seem almost mundane by comparison. He represents the ultimate horror, evil so ancient and otherworldly that it transcends human understanding entirely. Most players never see the terrifying presence speech checks in Fallout, and this is actually good, because some of them are so dark they'll make you question your entire life. So today, I'll be going over every single terrifying presence speech check, starting with a guy that disappeared, Ranger Milo. You stumble into Nelson after clearing out Legion slavers, expecting a handshake from the NCR. Instead, Ranger Milo acts like you just interrupted his lunch break. Here's the thing about Milo. He's that annoying middle manager who takes credit for your work while simultaneously questioning your methods. You've just rescued his boys from crucifixion, turned Caesar's pet project into a ghost town, and this guy still has the audacity to lecture you about protocol. The terrifying presence option lets you remind him exactly who did the heavy lifting here. You lean in, drop a threat so cold it could freeze the Mojave, and suddenly Milo remembers he has urgent business elsewhere. He'll literally sprint away from you, and if you're feeling spicy, you can open fire on his retreating back with very small loss to your NCR reputation. This is your first taste of what terrifying presence really does. It turns dialogue into a weapon, letting you skip straight to violence while everyone else is still trying to negotiate. Making one ranger run is cute, but can you do it to an entire military base? Turns out you can, and the game rewards you for it. Lieutenant Haggerty. You walk into Helios 1 expecting a warm welcome for helping with their solar power problem. Lieutenant Haggerty greets you like you just tracked mud across her carpet. This woman runs security at what's essentially a giant space laser disguised as a power plant, and she acts like the NCR owns the place despite squatting in a building they barely understand. The moment you show up, she's already sizing you up like you're another wasteland vagrant looking for handouts. Here's where terrifying presence turns a routine checkpoint into psychological warfare. You look her dead in the eyes and tell her you'll carve a knife from her bones, skin her, and wear her as a coat, not "I might hurt you" or "back off." You describe in disturbing detail exactly how you'll turn her into arts and crafts supplies. Her troops hear this. Her troops process this. Her troops watch their commanding officer's face go pale as she realizes you're not making empty threats. You're explaining the recipe. The entire camp turns hostile immediately, but here's the beautiful part. You get the first shot because they're all frozen in terror for about 5 seconds. 2 NCR officers terrorized, but NCR soldiers are one thing. They're stretched thin, demoralized, and barely holding territory. What about elite forces in power armor who are supposed to be the wasteland's apex predators? Buckle up, because we're about to make the Brotherhood of Steel scatter like rad roaches. Brotherhood Paladins. You're investigating who's been stalking the followers of the apocalypse when you find Brotherhood Paladins playing spy games. They're not happy about being discovered. The Brotherhood of Steel is supposed to be the wasteland's technological elite, trained soldiers in the most advanced armor pre-war science could produce, armed with weapons that turn regular people into red mist. These specific paladins are on a Black Ops mission tracking a former member, and they take their operational security seriously. When you confront them, their first instinct is to intimidate you into backing off because that's what normally works. People see T-45 power armor and think, I should leave. Terrifying Presence flips that script so hard it gives them whiplash. You respond to their threats with something so unhinged that these veteran soldiers in indestructible armor decide discretion is the better part of valor. They scatter like radroaches when you turn on a light, which is absolutely bonkers considering their equipment advantage. The Brotherhood's entire identity revolves around being superior to Wastelanders through technology and training. You just made their elite forces retreat using Stone Age tactics, psychological warfare, and they hate you for it. Soldiers in power armor ran away from you using nothing but words. That's 3 military encounters, 3 victories, and 0 bullets fired. But here's where the experiment gets interesting. Can you out-intimidate the people who specialize in intimidation? The Mojave's most feared killers? The people who've built their entire reputation on making others afraid? Let's find out by threatening the most theatrical mass murderer in the Wasteland. Caesar himself. You finally reach the fort expecting a boss fight, or at least some dramatic standoff. Instead, Caesar wants to chat philosophy and offer you a job. Caesar built an empire on fear, conquest, and really aggressive cosplay of ancient Rome. He's the big bad of the Mojave, the man who crucifies NCR soldiers for breakfast and has an entire army willing to die on his command. Walking into his tent and having a civil conversation feels wrong, like defusing a bomb by asking it nicely to stop ticking. The Terrifying Presence option lets you flip the script entirely. While he's monologuing about Hegelian dialectics and the synthesis of tribes, you interrupt with a threat so raw it catches him completely off guard. This is a man who hasn't been genuinely afraid in years, who's so insulated by fanatical bodyguards that fear became a distant memory. You bring it back. His Praetorian guards don't know how to react because nobody threatens Caesar in his own tent and lives. The 5-second fear window opens, his guards hesitate, and you can absolutely light up the most protected man in the wasteland before they process what's happening. The meta beauty here is that Caesar's entire ideology revolves around dominating others through superior will and force. You just dominated him, using nothing but words and audacity. It doesn't matter if you die 30 seconds later under a pile of machetes. You made Caesar flinch, and that's something his own followers never managed. Caesar, the Brotherhood, Vulpes, you've broken the Wasteland's most feared factions. But there's one category even harder to terrorize. Criminals who survive specifically by being unterrifiable. Street enforcers who've seen every threat, survived every fight, and lived in Freeside where death is a Tuesday afternoon activity. Can you scare people who've already seen the worst humanity has to offer? Let's find out by collecting a debt the hard way. Grex in Freeside. You collect debt for Francine Garrett, and the last guy on your list is Grex. He's exactly the kind of person who makes collections dangerous. Grex is a Freeside thug, which means he's survived in the most concentrated pocket of desperation, violence, and poverty in the Mojave. He's not some pampered merchant or soldier with backup. He's a street-level survivor who's seen everything. When you show up demanding payment, his natural response is to consider whether stabbing you is easier than paying. Most players either pay his debt themselves to avoid violence or just fight him. Because debt collectors don't typically inspire sympathy, Terrifying Presence lets you out-thug the thug. You get in his face and make it abundantly clear that whatever he's survived on these streets pales in comparison to what you'll do if he doesn't pay up right now. Grex takes one look at your eyes, realizes you're not bluffing, and hands over the caps without a fight. Grex was street muscle, dangerous, but straightforward. Now let's terrorize someone who hides their violence behind a smile. Time to ruin a con man's entire operation with pure fear. Greasy Johnny. You're investigating a missing person for the Garrett family when you track the suspect to Greasy Johnny. He's trying very hard to act innocent. Johnny runs a sketchy operation near North Vegas, the kind of place where questions about missing people get deflected with nervous laughter and sudden memory loss. He knows exactly what happened to the person you're looking for, but admitting it opens him up to consequences he'd rather avoid. The usual approach is either paying him off or passing a regular speech check to extract information. Terrifying Presence throws all that negotiation out the window. You make it crystal clear that cooperation isn't optional, and whatever protection he thinks he has won't matter when you're done with him. Johnny's self-preservation instincts override his criminal code immediately. He talks, he gives you everything, and then he runs like his life depends on it, because in that moment, it absolutely does. The metatextual beauty is that Johnny makes his living exploiting desperate people in a desperate city. You just became the most desperate thing in his vicinity, and suddenly, exploitation doesn't seem like such a solid business model. 2 street criminals down. Now let's scale it up. Can you terrify an entire gang at once? Volpe's Inculta. You arrive in Nipton expecting a town. You find a lottery where the grand prize is being allowed to crawl away on broken legs. Volpe's Inculta is waiting for you like a teacher who caught you skipping class, except this teacher just orchestrated a massacre for pedagogical purposes. He's calm, collected, and disturbingly articulate about why he burned an entire settlement alive. Most players either shoot him on sight or let him walk because killing him has consequences. Terrifying Presence gives you a third option that's arguably more satisfying than both. You tell Volpes you're going to make him wear his own head the same way he wears that dog on his scalp. This is a man who just committed genocide as a casual Tuesday activity, and suddenly he's the one who looks shaken. The genius part is that this option actually reduces your Legion infamy compared to just shooting him. Apparently, threatening a Frumentarius so viciously that he runs away screaming is less offensive to Caesar than simple murder. The Legion respects the hustle when you out-intimidate their intimidation specialist. This moment crystallizes why players love this perk, despite its limited uses. Any build can shoot Volpes. Only a speech build can make him feel what his victims felt: pure, irrational terror before turning him into a red smear. You just made Caesar's top operative run away screaming. But Volpes is a soldier, ultimately. He still answers to someone. What if you threaten the man who answers to nobody? What if you walk into Caesar's own military compound and make the most powerful man in the Mojave flinch? That's not just intimidation, that's ideological warfare. Benny at the tops. You finally track down the rat who shot you in the head and stole your delivery. He's acting like your old friend's catching up. Benny is peak New Vegas, a charmer, a schemer, a guy who'd sell his own mother for a shot at Mr. House's throne. He shot you, buried you, and moved on with his life like it was another Tuesday. Now you're in his casino, surrounded by his bodyguards, and he's trying to smooth talk his way out of consequences like he always does. Every fiber of his being believes he can negotiate this. That's when you hit him with Terrifying Presence and watch his ring-a-ding worldview shatter. Whatever you say, it's so viscerally threatening that his guards, the chairman, professional killers who are literally paid to protect him, freeze up. They don't draw weapons, they don't posture. They just stand there processing the fact that someone just promised to do unspeakable things to their boss in the middle of his own casino. Benny's face goes from, "Hey baby," to, "Oh god, I'm gonna die." The 5-second window lets you absolutely demolish him before his security can save him. It's poetic justice. He ambushed you when you couldn't fight back. Now you're ambushing him with words while his muscle is too terrified to intervene. But if you think club owners have it rough, wait until you see what happens when you threaten someone whose entire job is managing dangerous people. Jean-Baptiste Cutting. You walk into the Silver Rush with Cass, knowing full well the Van Graffs want her dead. Jean-Baptiste is standing there with barely concealed murder in his eyes. The Silver Rush operates on a simple principle. You touch their merchandise, you die. You threaten their business, you die. You exist in a way that inconveniences them, you probably die. Jean-Baptiste Cutting is their head of security, which means he's the guy who turns those deaths from hypothetical to actual. Bringing Cass here is supposed to trigger an ambush where the Van Graffs eliminate a business rival and you either help or stay out of the way. Terrifying Presence lets you inject yourself directly into their murder plot with maximum aggression. You tell Jean-Baptiste what you'll do to him if anything happens to Cass, and you sell it so convincingly that this professional killer decides maybe murdering your companion isn't worth whatever you just described. It doesn't save Cass permanently. The Van Graffs are persistent, but it buys time, and more importantly, it asserts dominance in a location specifically designed to make you feel powerless. The Van Graffs spend the entire game acting like they're untouchable because they have energy weapons and money. You just made their security chief blink using nothing but a scary voice and conviction. The Van Graffs control one building, but what happens when you need to clear out an entire gang that's taken over government property? Chavez's crew. You're cleaning up Prim for the locals when you find Chavez's crew squatting in government property. They think numbers give them safety. Chavez and his boys took advantage of Prim's lack of law enforcement to set up shop in the deputy's old office, which is exactly the kind of opportunistic parasitism that happens when civilization breaks down. They're not particularly dangerous compared to other threats in the Mojave, but they're armed, they're together, and they're confident enough to tell you to get lost. Most players either kill them outright or pass a speech check to convince them to leave peacefully. Terrifying Presence is the third option that somehow manages to be more violent than just shooting them. You tell Chavez what's going to happen if they stay, and you deliver it with such conviction that his entire crew realizes they're not dealing with another wasteland drifter. The problem is they're now too terrified and angry to just leave. They attack immediately, except you get those precious 5 seconds where they're running around panicked while you pick them off. The narrative brilliance is that you essentially scared them to death. They died because they were too frightened to think straight, which is arguably more terrifying than simply being outgunned. Soldiers? Check. Feared killers? Check. Street criminals? Check. But there's still one type of encounter we haven't covered, the pointless ones. The checks so easy or so worthless that using Terrifying Presence feels like overkill. Let me show you the 2 most underwhelming intimidation checks in the game, starting with the one that's literally easier than just asking nicely. Omerta Thug. You're investigating the Omertas at Gomorrah when you need information about Kachino. A random thug thinks he can stonewall you. This is technically a Terrifying Presence option, but it's also completely pointless because the alternative speech check is only 28, basically automatic for anyone who took this perk in the first place. The thug is just a low-level enforcer who knows where Kachino is but doesn't think you're important enough to tell. You can either sweet-talk him with a baby-tier speech check or hit him with Terrifying Presence for literally the same outcome. He tells you what you want to know and probably needs new pants either way. The community jokes about this one because it's such a waste of the perk's potential. You could be threatening Caesar or Vulpes and Kulta, but instead, you're burning your cool intimidation power on a doorman at a casino. The only value here is completion. If you're trying to use every Terrifying Presence option in a playthrough, congratulations. You intimidated a guy you could have convinced with a firm please. Now let's shift gears from pointless to actually useful with the Atomic Wrangler. That was pointless. Here's another one that's technically useful, but barely qualifies as intimidation. James Garrett. You're recruiting talent for the Garretts when you discover they've got Hadrian under an exploitative contract. James isn't interested in letting his investment walk away. The Atomic Wrangler runs on morally gray business practices. They're not evil, but they're definitely not above taking advantage of desperate people to keep their establishment profitable. Hadrian is stuck in what's essentially indentured servitude, entertaining clients when he'd rather be literally anywhere else. James Garrett holds the contract, and from a business perspective, releasing Hadrian represents lost revenue. When you try to recruit Hadrian for a competing establishment, James falls back on the standard capitalist defense. Contracts are contracts. Terrifying Presence lets you present a compelling counter-argument that contracts mean nothing to someone willing to hurt people. James does quick mental math on whether keeping Hadrian is worth whatever you just implied you'd do, and decides his profit margins aren't that important. Hadrian goes free, you get your recruit, and James learns that sometimes the wastes are too wild for paperwork to matter. This one matters because it's using intimidation for an arguably good outcome, freeing someone from exploitation, which gives Terrifying Presence rare moral flexibility. That was using intimidation for good. Now let's look at something completely different, when the hunters become the hunted. Disguised bounty hunter? You're investigating Prim's power structure when a bounty hunter approaches claiming Gene skydiving. It's obviously a trap. This bounty hunter is either incredibly stupid or incredibly confident, probably both. He's been sent to collect you, but instead of just ambushing you like a professional, he walks up and tries to bait you with a hilariously transparent lie about someone named Gene going skydiving in the Mojave wasteland where functioning aircraft don't exist. The whole encounter reads like a minor league hitman who watched one too many detective noirs and thought smooth talking would work. Most players just shoot him or pass a regular check to make him leave. Terrifying Presence lets you skip the foreplay and get straight to the point. You're not falling for his nonsense, you know why he's here, and if he doesn't leave right now, the only thing diving will be his intestines when you rip them out. The hunter decides his contract isn't worth it and disappears. The entertainment value is watching someone who thought they were the predator realize they just tried to hunt something exponentially more dangerous. That was a solo hunter making a mistake. But what happens when you interrupt Legion operations and they think their authority protects them? Karl's Legionaries. You're negotiating with the Great Khans at Red Rock Canyon when Legion soldiers show up trying to recruit. Karl thinks Rome's backing makes him untouchable. The Legion's recruitment pitch to the Khans is pretty straightforward. Join the winning team or get assimilated by force later. Karl and his boys are confident because they're Legion, and Legion soldiers don't typically face resistance when making these offers. They've got the largest army in the region, they've got momentum, and they've got Caesar's explicit blessing to expand by any means necessary. When you intervene in their recruitment drive, they expect you to either back down or die. Terrifying Presence introduces option 3 to make them experience the fear they usually inflict on others. You drop a threat so visceral that these soldiers who crucify people for fun suddenly remember what it's like to be on the receiving end of violence. They scatter, abandoning their recruitment mission entirely, which is catastrophic for Legion morale. The thematic weight here is enormous. The Legion's whole deal is that they've conquered fear through discipline and ideology. You just proved that fear isn't conquered. It's just sleeping, waiting for someone scary enough to wake it up. Speaking of waking things up, let's discuss what happens when Legion assassins come hunting you a second time. Making Legion recruiters flee is satisfying, but the real test comes when Caesar sends his death squad specifically for you. Legion Pursuit Squad. You've pissed off Caesar enough that he sent kill squads after you. The second group thinks they'll succeed where the first failed. Legion assassins are supposed to be the elite, soldiers trained specifically to hunt down and eliminate high-value targets that regular troops can't handle. They ambush you in the wasteland with numerical advantage and the element of surprise, confident that this time they've got you. They've seen your reputation, they've heard the stories, and they've decided those stories are exaggerated. Terrifying Presence lets you demonstrate exactly how wrong they are. You respond to their ambush with a declaration so violent it would make Mars himself pause, not while there are still spines left unshattered, or something equally unhinged. These professional killers, trained to suppress fear and execute their targets regardless of danger, just freeze. For 5 seconds, they're not thinking about Caesar or honor or duty. They're thinking about survival. The mechanical beauty is obvious. You just turned an ambush against you into an ambush you're executing. But the narrative satisfaction is deeper. Caesar sent his best, and you made his best wish they'd called in sick today. Now if you think terrorizing killers is good, wait until you see what happens when you threaten to commit biological warfare against your own faction. Private Crenshaw. You're investigating sabotage at Camp McCarran when you discover it's just a prank war between soldiers. Crenshaw is the instigator. Military life breeds pranks. It's a psychological release valve for people living under constant stress in a war zone. Crenshaw took it too far, though, and his jokes are causing operational problems for the NCR's most important base in the region. When you confront him about it, he's defensive because, in his mind, it's just harmless fun. Terrifying Presence lets you explain, in disturbing detail, exactly how harmless you're about to be. You tell him you'll pollute the ventilation system with his rotting corpse, which is both creative and deeply disturbing considering you're threatening to commit biological terrorism against your own side. Crenshaw's face does this beautiful journey from, "It's just a prank, bro," to, "Oh god, this person is serious," to, "I need to leave right now." He runs, the prank war ends, and everyone at McCarran learns that there's one person on base you absolutely do not mess with. The dark comedy here is that you solved a discipline problem by being way more terrifying than any sergeant or commanding officer. The NCR can't decide if they should thank you or assign you to a psychiatric evaluation. But if threatening low-level soldiers seems petty, let's talk about the most useless, terrifying presence check in the entire game. Legion Assailants. You're walking the Mojave when another Legion death squad appears. You're tired, they're confident, and everyone's about to have a bad time. By this point in the game, Legion assassins are routine. You've killed so many that you're basically running a Legion-themed haunted house where they're the victims. This particular squad shows up like all the others, ready to die for Caesar's glory. And you can engage them like normal, or pass a speech check. Or you can use Terrifying Presence to flip the entire encounter on its head. When you drop your threat, screaming about unshattered spines and promising levels of violence that make crucifixion look tame, the entire squad breaks. Not one or two guys, the whole unit. They scatter in different directions. Their formation collapses and they're so busy running they forget to fight back. It's the purest expression of what this perk should be, using words to turn confident attackers into terrified refugees. The legacy of Terrifying Presence isn't in optimal builds or speedrun strategies. It's in moments like this, where a speech-focused character gets to feel like an action hero without firing a shot, where personality becomes deadlier than any gun. New Vegas gave us 17 chances to be the scariest thing in the Mojave, and that's 17 more chances than most RPGs ever offer.